last night in class, and I got a definite answer. I knew several of us thought, but I wanted to go straight to the Real Estate Commission and get the actual answer. Because one, we need to know where our resources are. We need to know where to go. You can go to Google and find anything you want to find, but we need to know where our resources are. So North Carolina Real Estate Commission's website is a great place. We're going to show you that website at some point as well too. But the question I got last night was, would material facts apply to residential and commercial? And while I think we all kind of felt like they would, I wasn't sure. So the Real Estate Commission, and I found an article, which I went ahead and put in our Google Drive because it's pretty relevant to what we're talking about. It's called What is a Material Fact? You guys have this in your Google Drive, so I'll let you read it on your own. But the couple of things that caught my attention, all brokers have a duty to disclose whether buyer listing agent, let's see, where is it? Representing a buyer or tenant, seller or sale or rent, buyer or tenant. And then it goes on to say, and what you guys might find interesting is some kind of examples, specifics. We talked about the four things, specifically material facts. But if we look down here in facts that relate directly to the property, one of the examples is specifically talking about helping a commercial buyer make sure that the zoning matches what they want to use that commercial building for. So this reinforces we always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. And, I used to say, whether you're a single agent, dual agent, designated seller, subagent, whether you're talking to a buyer or seller, I need to start saying, whether you're talking to a buyer or tenant, whether you're doing residential, commercial, agriculture, or industrial, we always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. So again, this is in our Google Drive for you. The other article I put in here is an oldie but goodie. This one was actually published in like 2015, but it still rings true today. And I think it helps us better understand this idea of common knowledge. So when we're walking around looking for those red flags, really we're basing those red flags off of common knowledge. So for example, let's say you got the listing and you and the seller are walking through the property and you're taking notes so you know how to properly list the property. And you and the seller walk into the kitchen and you look around the kitchen and you look at the appliances and no red flags go up to you. And you actually ask the seller, are all of your appliances in good working order? And the seller says yes, and nothing throws a red flag to you. I've done my discovery. I asked the questions, I looked, nothing looked suspicious to me. Does that make sense? It's not like when the seller says, yes, everything's in working order, I'm going to be like, well, I'll be the judge of that and run over there and make sure that the burners work and the oven turns on, things like that. If my red flag doesn't go up, then I don't have a reason to continue. We can move on to the next room. Now, if we walk into that kitchen, then the oven door is like cockeyed a little bit. Y'all, I'm not an oven expert, but I know my oven at home, the door doesn't sit like that. Would that throw a red flag to you? That's not in the way that it was intended to work. And I think that's kind of something important when we're thinking about material facts. What the heck? Why don't y'all write that down? In the way that it was intended to work. And if it's not intended, oven door should be straight to seal in and keep the heat. And if it's not, that's not the way that it was intended to work. So those couple articles, what is common knowledge? The what is material fact just came out like last May, so it's still relevant. Well, it all is. But again, just kind of gives you some specific examples. So thank you. I apologize, I don't remember who asked the question, but thank you for the question. And also thank you for giving me the opportunity to be sure before I respond. I definitely always want to make sure I'm getting the right information out there. Any quick questions on that? All right. So the last piece of unit 3, we're going to talk about We're going to talk about some environmental hazards, and we're going to just briefly go through some of the more common environmental hazards. Again, this all comes up when I'm investigating and learning about the property. Of Unit 3, this is the least testable section of Unit 3. So we're going to get through this pretty quickly. We just really need a basic understanding of things that we need to be on the lookout for. And then the end of this section, we're going to talk about what our responsibility is with these environmental hazards. So first off, guess what? When you come across any kind of any of these environmental hazards, I have a duty to disclose. I have to disclose what I know. Again, if your red flag goes up, then we can encourage buyer or seller to investigate or learn more, but I still need to be on the lookout for them. Sometimes a seller will say, oh yeah, I've addressed that, I've remediated that, but we still have a duty to disclose. Seller states that this was an issue and it's been cured or removed, but a buyer still has the right to know that once upon a time ago it was there. And then any contamination outside of the property, because it could affect its value. So we're going to talk about some of those things that could contaminate outside. There's environmental experts all around. So there's environmental engineers, specialists. Your area, you may have different, maybe your health department, for example, your local health department. A lot of the times our home inspectors can help point us in the right direction, specifically where to get some of these things tested. Another decent source is the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. They have their own website and kind of allow us to do a little deeper dive on these environmental issues. And then we'll also give education and sources for us as well. So again, mostly with this, we're trying to be the source of the source and help point buyers and sellers in the right direction when they want to learn more about what they might be dealing with. So to go through some of the environmental hazards that we may come across, and probably specifically in residential sales, one of the ones you are going to come across the most often is going to be lead-based paint. With lead-based paint, anything built prior to 1978, write that year down. Residential properties built prior to 1978, we need to disclose, we have a seller disclosure that discloses that the property was built prior to 1978 and it may have lead in the paint. I'm not telling you it does, but prior to 78, they used lead in paint because it was a drying agent. It allowed the paint to dry faster. We realized it was bad for us, and so we banned it. If the certificate of occupancy was issued before 1978, then it may have lead-based paint. It's a seller disclosure / buyer acknowledgement. When we say caveat emptor, the seller doesn't have to disclose much. This is another one of these exceptions. If the seller's ever had it tested for lead, if the seller is aware of lead in the home, then they need to disclose that. Y'all, lead-based paint rules are federal law. Federal overrides caveat emptor. So they would have to disclose what they know. But if they don't know, they have nothing to disclose. What if they didn't hire painters? What if they were do-it-yourselfers, right? So they can only disclose what they know. The concern with lead-based paint is young children and women with child. Lead-based paint poisoning affects those little developing bodies, those little developing organs. So specifically, our buyers and tenants come with kids. So we want to make sure that we provide the seller disclosure. There's a for rent version as well. But for the sales side, we're going to provide the seller disclosure, and the buyer's going to acknowledge that they have the right to have that tested. The EPA has published a really nice brochure that talks about the possible dangers of lead in the home, just trying to help educate the buyer and the tenant in that situation. Can I come back to that, Evelyn? So again, the year is 1978, when it comes to lead-based paint, you need to know this. Here's the cover of that EPA booklet. It looks like it's in Learn, Test, Pass. Y'all don't spend your study time on this. I would just say know that it's there. And when you are working with buyers and sellers, we can get our hands on this easily. There's a PDF version. Your firm probably make it available to you. Again, it's about trying to help educate the public, just to make sure that they're aware of the dangers of lead in the home. So what does the owner have to provide if we have lead, if there's lead-based paint? If there was lead-based paint and the owner had it remediated, then they should have a certificate that says that the home is lead-free. So if the seller has that, we're asking questions. We want to make sure that we get that. Does the seller have to, or the owner have to certify? No, they don't have to have it tested to sell it or lease it. They don't have to have it inspected. All they are required to do is disclose what they know. So if they don't know, they can't disclose. Question comes in, can't we just re-scrape it, paint it and repaint it again? It doesn't work that way because oftentimes the lead soaks into the wood, and when it's there, it's there. And think about this, things built prior to 1978, I mean, you could have layers of paint on the windowsill this thick now, but the bottom layer is still that lead poisoning. So it would have to have a specialist to come in and treat that. The owner doesn't have to certify. They only have to disclose what they know. They don't have to have it tested or inspected. The buyer can choose to have it inspected during their process when they're buying, but they don't have to. It's an option. So again, no, the owner doesn't have to pay for an inspection. All they have to do is disclose what they know, and they can only disclose what they know. Does that make sense? If you moved in this house and you were a do-it-yourself painter and you've never had a professional in the front door, what do you know? You can't disclose what you don't know. And that's where we need to ask some questions. And must the owner allow the tenant to inspect? The tenant generally doesn't get the right to inspect because it's not their home. Somebody else is allowing them to live there. However, we do still want to educate the tenant on the possible dangers of lead in the home. Only the buyer has the right to inspect, and both parties have the right to receive that EPA booklet. So if you hire help, if you hire somebody to come in and paint for you, then they should, part of their process should be to send it off and have it tested. If they find anything, we disclose what we know. And there's some hefty fines attached to the help, the hired painters or the general contractors, whoever's doing the job. They could be facing daily state fines. They could be facing daily federal fines. My HGTV people, I don't know if y'all remember, if you were aware, but several years ago, Chip and Joanna got themselves in trouble. And it was because of lead-based paint laws, lead-based paint disclosure. So that's very, very real. You know, if it can happen to reality stars, then it can happen to any of us. And like we said, hello, owner occupied, do it yourself is exempt. So if you're going to run out to Home Depot and get paint and brushes and everything, and you're going to paint the room yourself, you have the option to have it tested, but you don't have to. There's no requirement. It's only when you hire contracted help, now they're required to have that tested, but only if the home was built prior to 1978. Questions on lead? Of all the environmental issues, lead's the one that's going to come up the most. I think lead's the one that we deal with the most often. However, it's not the only one that we deal with. Another one, specifically where you are at in the country, another one that comes up is radon. Radon is a gas. It doesn't have a smell or an odor. You can't see it. Radon is the byproduct of the decay of matters in the ground. And as those matters decay, it releases this radon gas. The gas looks for cracks in the ground, in the soil, to release and allow the gas escape into the atmosphere where it belongs. And if those cracks in the ground, if you happen to have a house on those cracks and the radon releases, that radon gas could get into the property. It could seep into the well water. It could come up through the cracks in the ground into the home. The only way to know if there's radon in a home is to have it tested. Again, most of our home inspectors can assist us with this or point us in the right direction. And they set up their radon test kit, and it sits in the home for 2 to 3 days. And at the end of 2 to 3 days, it kind of takes a snapshot of the radon level in the home every hour. Takes a snapshot. What's the radon level? And at the end of 2 or 3 days, it gives us an average. And if the average is 4.0 picocuries or more, we got a problem. Under 4.0 picocuries is not anything to worry about. Y'all, radon's everywhere. We just don't want it trapped in the home. There's a radon mitigation system where they would kind of come in and drill a pipe at the lowest level of the home. And this pipe runs up the side of the house and exits out into the atmosphere where this radon gas belongs anyway. And the pipe has little fans that pull the air from that lowest level, from that basement, or even if it's on a slab, that pulls that radon gas from the lowest level and again pushes it up into the atmosphere where it belongs anyway. So maybe you're under contract and the buyer has it tested for radon and it comes back at 4.0 picocuries or more. The buyer can ask the seller to do repairs. Remind me, is the seller required to fix anything? Do they have to do any repairs whatsoever? No. And that includes the radon mitigation system. As we're going to learn when we get into our contract, the buyer may have an out. And if they choose to terminate, listing agents, you now have a material fact on your hand. And we have to disclose that the last radon test came back at 4.0 picocuries. I think in this case, it's advantageous to look at the seller and say, look, radon's not going to go away. So if you don't want to deal with it with this buyer, it's going to come up with the next buyer. Does that make sense? But again, they're still under no obligation to disclose or to put in that radon mitigation system. But once we know, we'll have that duty to disclose. It is a material fact if it's 4.0 picocuries or more. Another environmental concern is asbestos. Asbestos was once used in insulation. You might have insulation wrapped around pipes to help keep them warm. It was also used in some ceiling tiles, again, for insulation. Asbestos, when it's intact, is just fine. Oh, here's some examples of where we can see. We don't need to know that, but that just gives us an idea. When asbestos is intact, it is just fine. The problem with asbestos is when it becomes friable. When it becomes friable, it's coming apart and the little particles are breaking up and they're getting in the air. You and I walk in the room and we breathe that air. So now those little particles are getting into our lungs, major respiratory issues. Trying to encapsulate it is the preferred method with asbestos. You can kind of wrap it back up, seal it back up. However, if you're doing major work or even demolition, then removal might be the preferred treatment for asbestos. Again, we got the asbestos experts out there that'll come in and tell us what is the best remediation. Y'all seen those commercials on TV, the lawyers? I never get this word right, but they're saying if you or someone you know has mesothelioma, is that close? Then that's somebody that's been exposed to asbestos. That's somebody that's having some kind of lung respiratory issues because of asbestos. If we come across asbestos, I have a duty to disclose it. Disclose, disclose, disclose. Another one, mold. All you need is a little bit of moisture, a little bit of oxygen, and mold's going to do its thing. There are, I don't know how many of thousands of strains of mold. Mold ranges from that loaf of bread you've had a little bit too long to black toxic mold that's obviously not good for you. And there's so many strains in between. You and I are not mold experts. Y'all don't walk in a room and say, oh, a little bit of mold ain't going to hurt you. If we come across it, the only way to determine the type is to have it tested. And again, there are experts out there. I can't walk up to this wall with my bottle of spray bleach, chicka, 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 and think that this is going to remediate it. Stay in your lane, you guys. Let somebody else handle it. But obviously, I cannot walk in there and say, oh, no, this is this kind of mold, but it's not a problem, or it is. So make sure they have it tested. And again, our home inspectors can often help point us in the right direction. Carbon monoxide. This is the byproduct of incomplete combustion. So maybe a gas pipe in your home that's not completely sealed. It might release carbon monoxide. Again, you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it. I don't even know that you can test for it, to be honest. Carbon monoxide is known as the silent killer because there's so many stories out there where the whole family goes to sleep that night and y'all, they never wake up. Carbon monoxide works fast. It limits the blood flow to the brain once it gets in. There are carbon monoxide testers. These days, you can even get a smoke/carbon monoxide tester. And if it indicates either one, it'll set it off. If you don't have one of these for your home, make that a note for you to do this weekend. Promise me you guys will do that because you don't know, unfortunately, in some cases, until it's too late. So carbon monoxide, again, I have to disclose what I know. Formaldehyde was once used to treat, and it still is, to treat lumber. We find a lot of formaldehyde in our furniture. It's just part of the building process. They did ban it at some point, but now it's come back with a warning because there is no conclusive evidence, but all they can do is warn that it may cause respiratory issues. Another environmental issue, of course, we talked about this last night, were those meth labs, the homes with meth labs. Again, those vapors, those gases get into the home, seeps into the walls and the wood, the floor, and it's something that, you know, disclose, disclose, disclose. Brownfields. Once upon a time ago, we had an industrial use building there, often with chemicals. And those chemicals have spilled at some point or just over the years of the natural wear and tear. And they've gotten into the soil and they've polluted the soil. So any properties around these brownfields needs to disclose, even if it's no longer, it doesn't go away from the soil overnight. Y'all, I had a teammate last year that came across brownfields from a previous warehouse near Old Salem, just about downtown. So please don't think you got to be out in the middle of nowhere to come across it. If there was ever an industrial plant there, we could be looking at brownfields, in which case we have contaminated soil. Landfills. These are heavily regulated. Landfills have federal regulations, state regulations, and local regulations. Either they're going to dig a big hole and use it for the landfill, or they might use maybe like a previous quarry or a previous mine surfing project, something like that. But they usually, the big thing with landfills is drainage control, because we want to make sure that that garbage juice is not getting into the soil, contaminating that area. So drainage, making sure that as the landfill itself breaks down, and usually what they do is like a couple layers of garbage, a layer of dirt, layer of garbage, layer of dirt to help it break down. Again, these things are heavily regulated. We talked last night about doing your diligence. If you're helping a buyer or a seller, put the address in Google and actually go to Google Maps and zoom out so we can let our buyers know there's a landfill, half a mile away, whatever, how close it is. Some days, especially a hot summer day, if the wind's blowing just right, residents nearby the landfill might have a garbage smell on their front porch, so we just need to disclose that the property that they're buying might be near or is near a landfill. Underground storage tanks, some of them are still in use, some of them have been abandoned. Once upon a time ago, we were wrong. And we thought when we were done with the storage tank, bury it out of sight, out of mind, right? No longer a problem. The problem is these things are steel. And after a while, steel corrodes. And if there's contents like gasoline or oil still in the tank, when it starts to corrode, those contents are going to leak out into the soil. If they're still in use, you might see, for example, a pipe sticking out of a backyard. So if you're walking in somebody's backyard, buyer seller's backyard, and you trip over a pipe, there's your red flag. You may also see a spot in the yard where the soil is a little bit darker. That could be another indicator that there's an underground storage tank. We have to disclose what we know. But if they ever find, especially an abandoned underground storage tank that leaked the contents, now it's leaking out the soil. If it's really good, it's getting into our groundwater and it's affecting multiple properties, multiple issues. Bottom line, you guys, whomever owns the property when it's discovered is going to be responsible for the cleanup. Now, I will say there are acts, there are funds to assist. So it's not like the owner's going to financially be all on their own. I just said they're going to be responsible. So they're going to have to make sure that they get with the proper people to remove it, clean up the soil, clean up the whatever's contaminated. I always say this is the section that all those super scary environmental things I just ran through, kind of afraid to breathe the air that we breathe now, aren't we? There's some crazy things out there. And even though you're just learning about this stuff, it's always been out there and it still is. So, you're going to come across it because that's who we're dealing with. We're dealing with the environment. We're dealing with the people that live in the environment. So we're going to see in just a second if you have heard me say, when it comes to these environmental issues, my number one responsibility is to disclose what I know. Look out for those red flags. Make sure you're asking your questions. Disclose, disclose, disclose. And then if the buyer or seller want to have it tested, we're going to help point them in the right direction so they know who to.
Julie,
Yes.
I've dealt with this firsthand in some property, and I just think it's very important for people to know it's not cheap at all, and
Yeah.
it takes time. And I think our whoever we're working with needs to be very aware of that because it's not a quick survey cost and you get the results back and you're done. It could be months and years. Just
Yep.
FYI.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Rihanna, for sharing that. And like I said, when they find the spill, they're gonna trace it back to the source. So your seller may be, your owner may just be shocked. What do you mean I have an abandoned underground storage tank? I never knew that. Guys, I saw once that across the country, there are billions of abandoned underground, that was with a B, of underground storage tanks. So, guys, we're not expected to go out there with our metal detector and look for it or anything. But again, if you see a pipe coming out of the backyard, if you have some kind of smell or oil stain on the grass, our little red flag just went up. So much of the environmental issues Many of them have some kind of super fund that can help with the mitigation costs, with the cleanup, whatever needs to be done, whatever the issue is. As Ariana said, this isn't going to happen overnight. So we need to tell our people to be patient. We got to go through the process. But again, I can help point them in the right direction. CERCLA, again, just kind of more of an FYI. This is another one that can kind of help us with the testing, like where to start. I know that's the question. Where do I start? So when this comes up, EPA and CERCLA are going to be your best places to start, and they'll have resources to help you go from there. And of course, you guys, please make sure you get your BIC involved so they won't be blindsided as well. So with environmental issues, who is to blame? Who's going to be responsible? And the one that currently owns it is the one that's going to be responsible. You may buy a house today, 5 years from now, get a knock on your door, if you will, that they've discovered an underground storage tank. If the previous owner didn't know because it was abandoned, it was buried, it was abandoned, there's nothing they can do. I mean, you could try to go after them, but bottom line, it's the current owner that's going to carry that reliability. And when it comes to us, what's our responsibility? Y'all want to unmute and everybody shout it at me?
Discover and disclose.
Disclose.
Disclose. Tiffany, you said discover as well. Yes, I have to ask questions. I have to say, wow, you look like you got some oil in the back part of the grass over there. What's going on? Or what's that pipe attached to? Or your home was built prior to 1978 and you got chipped paint. We've got to ask the questions. And then once we learn, our duty is to disclose. Everybody good with that? I don't care how you learn it, you guys. Once we know it, we can't unknow it. I got a question earlier about properties near cemeteries. That generally comes down to county, how that's handled in the county. Again, we're going to disclose, you know, some people are okay with living across the street from a cemetery, others are not. If they want to learn more about it, then we're going to help get them to the county, maybe the health department, to get, you know, find out that information. But there's usually different local laws. There's not one big state. This is how we, but again, they're designed in a way to try not to be a burden on the neighbors.
I live right up above a cemetery.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously you knew that when you.
It's not really that big of a deal, honestly.
Yeah. I'd say generally not. But again, remember, we're putting the address in and we're going to Google Maps and we're looking, right? So, you know, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, there's a cemetery a block and a half away. You know, we're also going to encourage our buyers to drive around your future neighborhood to see what you can see. Learn your future neighborhood. So, who is affected by exposure to lead-based paint?
Children.
Children and pregnant women.
The children and the pregnant women. Yes, those little developing bodies. Guys, and keep in mind, this is for residential property. Commercial doesn't matter because people don't live there. Kids don't live there. What are they called? Retirement homes don't have to worry about lead-based paint laws because kids don't live there. So it's going to affect those little developing bodies and organs. And exposure to mold, I didn't say that, but there are many allergies to mold. Sometimes those that have allergies to mold can tell you that there's mold before it's ever discovered it because they have that allergic reaction, they have that respiratory issue.
Miss Julie,
Yes.
did they care too, including the lead thing, right? Did they care?
Yeah, they can come in and do they can remove it, get rid of it, and then the seller will have a certificate that it's been remediated, that it's been addressed. And they would
No,
want to
I
share
say
that
in
with.
the daycare, but
Well, the daycare is not, so if it's in a residential home, yes, but if it's in a standalone commercial building, then maybe not, because it's not. And that's the key with lead-based paint. It's for residential properties. So, some people run a daycare out of their own home, right? So if it's built to 78, we want to make sure that we know about that. But yeah, if they just have a commercial building or out of a church or something, and that's a good point, Evelyn, thank you. If we're looking for residential properties where they live. Guys, guess what? We've gotten through Unit 3. Everybody give yourselves a pat on the back. Unit 3 is a big one, you guys. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to you that we've spent so much time on Unit 3?
Gonna study it a whole lot because there's gonna be a lot of questions on it.
Thank
Majority
you.
of
I
it
couldn't
is
have
gonna
said it
be
better myself. I need you guys, we are moving on from Unit 3, but I need you guys to go back. I need you guys to be reviewing Unit 2, reviewing Unit 1. These are, I mean, if we're talking about it, it's a good candidate for your test question, but you're gonna see questions on agency, both in the national and in the state specific section on both of your exams. Makes sense, right? That's what we're training you guys to do, is to be agents. So we need to make sure that you're very, very well versed in it before we turn you loose into the wild and let you work buyers, sellers, landlords, and tenants. Big deep breath. Unit 4. Unit 4, we're going to talk about some lead generation, and we're going to talk about advertising. This is going to be about what I can't do. Remember, you guys, this class, I'm not here to teach you guys how to be real estate agents. I'm teaching you the laws and the rules. So I'm not going to tell you how to get leads. I'm not going to tell you how to find buyers and sellers. I'm going to hit on it, but that's not what this class is about. What I'm going to talk to you about are the things that you can't do with your lead generation and your advertising. Think outside the box with your advertising. So we're going to talk about some laws that relate to unsolicited calls, faxes, and emails. We're going to talk about the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics, specifically Article 16, and what tortious interference means. So specifically on this section, how not to find clients, things that we need to be aware of. Again, think outside the box when you're looking for clients, but we need to be aware of what we can't do. First thing, if you plan on cold calling, by cold calling, I mean you're going to 411.com and you start calling people out off the website. Just, hey, you want to sell your house? Hey, you want to buy a house? If you're going to go cold calling, you first have to get your hands on the do not call registry. And if the person you think you're going to call is on the do not call registry, guess what? They've already told you, don't call me. We have got to honor the do not call registry. So before you pick up the phone to try to get business, you need to get your hands on this. There is a cost. I cannot tell you how much it is. Maybe your BIC will go in with you on it. Maybe it won't. But if phone calling, cold calling is the way you're going to go, then that do not call registry. And again, if that number's on there, they've already said, don't call me. And we've got to honor that. Gee, Julie, what's the big deal? It's just a phone call. Well, you could be looking federal fines up to $43,792 a call or $5,000 per call on the state. This is a pretty big deal. Guys, they've signed up for the do not call registry for a reason. Now, I see all of you rolling your eyes going, I get multiple spam calls every single day and I am on the do not call registry. Anybody else? I keep my phone on silent because I'm tired of all those dang spam calls. Guys, they're not doing it right. And a lot of these are, not easily findable, if you will. So just because others are out there doing it does not give us a golden ticket So just make sure, again, you're getting your hands on that do not call list. Now, there are a few exceptions to this. If you had a prior business relationship with somebody, this used to be your seller client, this used to be your buyer client, and that agency agreement has expired, because you previously had a business relationship with them, even if they are on the do not call, you can call them for up to 18 months after the relationship ended, after it expired. 18 months or until they say, please stop calling me. Whenever they tell you to stop calling me, we've got to honor their request. If you have a personal relationship with somebody or an invitation, maybe somebody came into your open house on Sunday and signed your open house registry and gave you their phone number. Even if they are on the do not call, we can call them for up to 3 months after we've received their phone number, or until they tell us to stop calling. Do we hear that common theme? When they say, please stop calling me, we've got to honor that request. The other thing to take into consideration is calling for sale by owners, or FSBOs. Can you call FSBO? Well, the answer to that is our absolute favorite answer. What is that? Well,
Depends.
it depends. It
Maybe.
depends. If I'm calling the FSBO because I genuinely have an interested buyer, I can call the FSBO on the do not call, because I'm bringing them the buyer that they are advertising. Did you hear me? A genuinely interested buyer. I cannot call the FSBO to solicit their listing if they are on the do not call. So if they're on the do not call, I'm not going to solicit the listing. They have chosen to go it alone. I'm going to respect that. However, when my buyer calls me and says, ooh, I just saw this FSBO up the street and I want to go see it, I'm going to call on behalf of my buyer. You can't get your BFF to act like a buyer to get your foot in the front door of the FSBO. Does that make sense? Pretend to be a buyer so I can get in there and meet them and hopefully get the listing. That's not the way the system works. Ready, willing, and able buyer, you're out showing a property. They're being pre-qualified. You know they're interested. Yep. And if they're not ready-ish, willing-ish, and able-ish, then you don't need to be out there showing them property anyway. But we at least want them pre-qualified before we take them out and see them. Questions on the FSBO? Yes, if you have a buyer. No, if you're soliciting the listing. Could you go knock on the FSBO's front door?
Yes.
Yeah. Not unless they're in a subdivision that says no soliciting or no trespassing. So if you want to solicit the listing, send them something in the mail. Go knock on their door. Safety always first. You just can't call them. There are rules out there, solicitation rules. If you're going to send junk fax, and by junk fax, we mean bulk fax. So you're going to send a bulk fax. Hey, I'm a broker. Call me today. The CAN-SPAM Act addresses email, massive bulk email. What the junk fax CAN-SPAM Act says is that you have to give them an opt-out. You have to give an unsubscribe button in the email. You guys ever get those? How do I get on this person's email list? And sometimes that unsubscribe button is teeny tiny, but you know what? It's there. We got to give them the opt-out before, or to be able to send bulk email or bulk faxes. If the recipient replies to your email and says, please remove me from your email list, that's equivalent to hitting the unsubscribe button. So we're going to honor that request. So no more doom and gloom. Real quick, what can we do? Well, we've talked about this, so just to kind of re-go over. Yep, that's what I said. Just to go over the highlights again. One of the first places you guys might start your marketing is social media. Start connecting with people, friends and families, whatever your preferred social media platform is. And when you get licensed and you start affiliated with a firm, make sure you tell the people, hey, I'm a broker now. If you or someone you know, guys, the one thing I like so much about social media, sometimes if you're telling people today that you can help them, they may not be ready to buy or sell. They maybe need to be reminded a couple months from now or 6 months from now or a year from now. So social media allows us to gently stay in front of them and remind them that we are in the business and we can help them. So when you affiliate with your firms, they may have some campaigns or social media suggestions. Another method to consider, we're going to go a little old school, but you can send anything snail mail. You can send anything, postcards, flyers, newsletters. Maybe there's a certain neighborhood that you want to market. You can target just that. So snail mail is fine. Again, old school. Door knocking, again, safety first. Before you go start knocking on people's doors, you may want to take a buddy with you, take another broker with you, maybe especially when you're new, you guys can work these leads together. I'd say just be very careful with door knocking. People aren't as accepting to strangers knocking on our front doors these days as what they used to be. I don't know about you guys, but if I'm not expecting you, I'm not opening my front door for you. So, and I think a lot of people have that same mentality as I do, unless you're Amazon or something, you know what I'm saying? But if I'm not expecting you, so, and that's just me, but just know that you know there might be some limitations to door knocking. You may not be able to get in front as many people, but can't you leave a little flyer on their doorknob or you know something to let them know that you stopped by? I can't put anything in their mailbox because I'm not a federal employee with the United States Post Office. I could put it on the flag outside of the mailbox, but I can't put stuff in their mailbox. But in all seriousness, I think the number one source, the number one place for you guys, some call it your center of influence, some call it your sphere of influence. No matter what you call, it's your people. Tell your family, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, tell everybody you come across. Back in my administrative days, I did new agent training for my firm. So I got you guys as soon as you got licensed. And one of the first homework assignments, and y'all take this next piece of information and do with it what you will. One of my very first homework assignments to my new agents was to take a piece of paper and write out 1 through 100 and then just start listing 100 people that you know. First 40, 50, 60 is pretty easy. After that, you're struggling. Don't you kind of know your mailman? Don't you kind of know your dental hygienist? You know, so you're really kind of stretching. But guess what? Your dental hygienist knows people as well. So it's about getting word of mouth out, letting the people know that you are licensed, letting the people know that you can help them. So center of influence, some call it your center of influence or your COI. Others call it your sphere. I call it your people. And don't discount your out of state family and friends as well, because now we can give a referral and receive a referral fee once you're active, once you're affiliated and active. So if you got, we were talking before the call, I'm from Pennsylvania. I got family in Pennsylvania. My family knows I have a license, and they know that even though they're in Pennsylvania, I can still help them because I can find them an agent. I can refer business up there. And again, think outside the box. You know, you guys are going to talk to an accountant so you can set aside your marketing budget so you're not make sure you're going over your marketing dollars. Sometimes you see real estate agents still using print media, magazines, newspaper. Sometimes you see one on a billboard, but just keep those marketing dollars in mind. Questions? In addition to these laws, of course, we have license law and commission rule that affects us as a broker. As we've mentioned, once you affiliate with your firm, if your firm is a member of the National Association of Realtors, then you too will join and you will become a realtor. Once you become a realtor, you have to follow the Code of Ethics. Code of Ethics addresses how we conduct ourselves when we're dealing with the public, how we're dealing with each other. It also specifies advertising, etc. You'll get your COE training, Code of Ethics training, when you affiliate with your firm and you join the local board of realtors. It'll be part of your onboarding and you'll go over the different codes. We also, as realtors, are required to do Code of Ethics every 3 years. So in addition to when you first get started, you'll also be doing Code of Ethics every 3 years. The good news is most COE classes can also count as one of your CEs. So you can do your elective, knock out your CE elective and your Code of Ethics. Interfering with somebody else's clients could be a legal liability. That's what's called tortious interference. That's on page 81 if you need to see that spelled out. Oh, here it is too. Tortious interference. And that's just the wrongful interaction of somebody else's client. We cannot solicit somebody else's client. Code of Ethics says that. Legalese say that as well. So we have to respect the fact if you see a listing for sale in the MLS, that seller is somebody's client. They wouldn't be in the MLS if they weren't. So it's not like I can scour the MLS and say, you know, you've been on the market for 6 months, and if you fire them and hire me, I can do a better job. I cannot solicit somebody else's clients. Has anybody ever been to an open house? And one of the first questions out of the agent's mouth is, are you working with an agent? We're not being nosy. We're just trying to determine if you're fair game or not. And if that buyer says, yes, I am, cool. I respect that. If they say, no, I'm not, well, here's my business card. And if I can help you, just let me know. So torturous interference, again, the wrongful interference with somebody else's relationship. Question comes in, can we use Facebook ads? Absolutely. Social media platforms are huge right now, as we can imagine. As we go to break, I'm going to say, y'all think about you guys are probably seeing them in your industry as well, but all of the real estate broker related TikTok memes that we've seen this week with the highs and lows of TikTok. And they came out in brokers getting clients, brokers not getting clients. Memes make us laugh. All right, let's take our first break. And when we come back, the next piece of this, we're going to get more into advertising. This section also gets into fair housing. So we're going to talk about fair housing as well, but let's take 10. Taking attendance. When it comes to our advertising, your firm may have policies, your firm may have restrictions, but of course, as you can imagine, the Real Estate Commission weighs in on this as well. Specifically, what the commission says about your advertising, may that be your personal marketing or advertising a property for sale. The one thing to always be aware is that we can't have a blind ad. Blind ads are an ad that do not list the firm. Whose listing is it?
Firm.
The
Firm.
firms. Whose brokerage services are you advertising under?
Firm.
The firm. So any of our personal marketing, any of your, again, your property marketing, we need to list the firm. And guys, it can't be part of your email. So if your email is julie@kellerwilliams.com, that's not sufficient. You actually need to have a logo or Keller Williams, whatever your firm is. So any blind ads would be one that doesn't include the firm. Obviously you're going to put your name on there without thinking, right? Call me, I can help you buy, but then you need to have the firm listed on there as well. The other thing that the commission rule speculates is that any advertisement that comes out under the firm's name needs to have your BIC's approval before you hit submit. We know how the internet works, right? You hit submit and it's gone. So before you hit submit, particularly you guys as provisional brokers, but even after you drop that provisional status, no advertisement should leave the firm without the BIC's approval. Funny story. We had our sales meeting today at our firm, and you know what our two big topics were? Seller net and advertising. So isn't that funny? So last night's class and today's class. So even once you get licensed, it doesn't hurt to have these reminders. And we had a very good discussion about taking screenshots of your Facebook ads. Isn't an ad on Facebook an ad? So taking that screenshot and uploading that into your personal marketing file so you have that documentation, but also making sure that our BIC approves it before it goes out. Remember from Unit 1, we said the BIC is responsible for 3 A's and 2 T's. And I'll let you review, but one of those A's is advertising. So the BIC is responsible. We need to make sure that we get that approved. And then careful about mixing up the laws. Do not call applies to phone calls. Do not call does not apply to email. Can spam does not apply to phone calls. Can spam applies to email. So let's make sure we have that written down. Do not call registry applies to making phone calls, cold calling. Can spam is about emailing, mass bulk emailing. So just make sure we're reading those questions, those test questions. I think if we've done enough practice questions, I really do. I know you guys feel that they like to trick you, but I don't like those words because they're not trying to trick you. They're trying to make sure that you understand the laws and the rules. So make sure we understand and don't get those mixed up. Thank you, Tiana. I got you. Any questions about our advertising? The next section in this unit, we're going to talk about federal fair housing. Thank you. We're going to talk about state fair housing. We've mentioned those protected classes. So we're going to talk about those protected classes, and we're going to talk about what it means to be a protected class under Federal Fair Housing Act. We're going to kind of compare fair housing, give some fact situations, some good information to know. And we're going to talk about the landlord tenant situation a little bit with providing reasonable accommodation modifications. Let me say this now going into federal fair housing. Federal fair housing doesn't really care about your opinion, your beliefs, your personal thoughts. Federal fair housing is what it is. And not only is this important for us to know for the exams, but it's also really important for us to know in the real life. Because guys, I don't know something to get you in trouble faster than violating fair housing, than negatively impacting one of the protected classes. One thing that fair housing teaches us, what you do for one, you do for all. So as we go into this, making sure that we're putting our own personal preferences aside and knowing that this is the law, this is big. So again, not just for your test, but the real world as well. So a little history lesson. Federal fair housing actually goes back to 1866. That's not a typo. And in 1866, we had something created called the Civil Rights Act of 1866. We're not quite to federal fair housing yet, but this was its origins. This was, for my history buffs out there, we were ending the Civil War, we were abolishing slavery, the country was changing, things were changing. And there was a need to make sure that we protected a certain class coming into a new world, a new life. So Civil Rights Act of 1866 is where it starts. Civil Rights Act of 1866 protects race. Now I'm going to define race in just a second. But 1866 protected race. Now I'm going to be very honest with you guys. Don't do it because I would call that a distraction. But if you were to go to Google and type in Civil Rights Act of 1866, you could probably find half the material says race and the other half of the material says race and color. Your syllabus says race. So what's your test going to say? Race. You can argue with me or Google all day long, but the syllabus says race. That's where the exam comes from. So that's what we're going to stick to. Federal fair housing does apply just to housing, but remember, we're not at federal fair housing yet. We're still in 1866. This act still applies today, and it doesn't just apply to residential, it applies to all real estate sales, residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, etc. Cool. So Civil Rights Act of 1866 covers race. And again, we will define that in just a second. A couple cases have come about. Again, we don't need to know these, be specific, but just know a lot of where we are today with fair housing have come from, and you've probably heard about these, Plessy versus Ferguson, established separate but equal doctrine, Jones versus Meyer, no exception for race or ancestral ethnic characteristics. So again, court cases over the years, these are just two examples. That's the only reason why they're here, of examples that apply to how we got to be, fast forward from the Civil Rights Act of 1866 to the true start of federal fair housing in 1968. We went 102 years before we added to the protected class of race. So today we have federal fair housing, came to be in 1968. It is administered and handled by the Housing and Urban Development, known as HUD. One thing that is never allowed, a couple things that are never allowed, but one thing that is never allowed, you may have a party that may be not required to follow federal fair housing. For example, a for sale by owner. If there's no broker involved in the transaction, then a FSBO and an unrepresented buyer do not have to follow federal fair housing. One thing that everybody, whether you're a FSBO, whether you have a broker, an unrepresented buyer, no matter who you are, one thing everybody needs to be aware of is that we can never discriminate our advertisements. So even if the FSBO could discriminate, they can't advertise their discrimination. Let's say, for example, I'm a for lease by owner. I have my own property that I want to lease, and I don't want to lease my property to men, for example. I could choose as a for lease by owner not to lease my property to men, but I can't advertise that discrimination. I cannot put in an ad, for example, men need not apply. So discriminatory advertising is never, ever, ever allowed. So fair housing in 1968 evolved. It continued on with race, and then we picked up the protected classes of color, religion, and national origin. Again, I will define all of these in just 1 minute. So think about it. We went from 1866 to 1968, 102 years later, and we're just now picking up color, religion, and national origin. Fast forward one more time. In 1974, we picked up sex. Please make a note. In 2021, under the category of sex and protected classes, we now have gender identity and sexual orientation. As our society continues to evolve, so will fair housing. So 2021, what was that? 3 years ago, we've picked up gender identity and sexual orientation. But in 1974, we had women's lib. Women's were getting rights. We could get credit cards. So in 1974, sex was adopted. Fast forward one more time to 1988, and we picked up handicap, disability status or conditions, and familial status, again, defining all of these in just 1 second. In addition to knowing the protected classes, I think you guys should know the years that they came to be, because I wouldn't put it past them to have a test question or an answer choice, for example, that says something like the year is 1972, and a woman felt like she was discriminated on an apartment application because she was a female. Well, in 1972, could you deny a woman an apartment strictly because of her sex?
Yes.
Yeah, because in 1972, sex wasn't a protected class. So it's the part of our history that we need to acknowledge. This just didn't happen all overnight. And y'all, 1988, no matter your age right now, 1988 was not that long ago. So we continue to evolve. We continue to grow. Like I said, as 2021, as our society continues to evolve, we can expect to see more protected classes. So 68, you have race, color, religion, national origin. 74, we picked up sex. At 88, we picked up handicap, condition, and familial status. Yeah, Angel.
Will 2021 be on the test?
I don't know the answer to that, but now you know.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Stephanie.
Hi, so quick question. Because like for example, for like college, like rent out like apartments and stuff, when they advertise, for example, only for looking for like a male or looking for like a female, so they can advertise that?
There are some exceptions to federal and state. And so we're going to talk about those exceptions. And single, what are they called? Single, oh, I just lost it. Like dorm rooms would be an exception. Military barracks, zero bedroom dwellings. That's what I'm looking for. 0 bedroom dwellings. So think dorm rooms, military barracks, things like that. That's exempt under state fair housing.
Okay, thank you.
So now that we know what year each protected class came to be, let's define the protected classes. And the best way I know to help us remember the protected classes is to think of fresh corn. We're going to spell out fresh corn using the protected classes. The E and the O are not protected classes. They're just there to fill in the blanks, equal opportunity, so we can spell. So our vowels are not protected classes, but the rest of it is. So first off, fresh corn. Familial status. Familial status is about the children, 18 years and younger. Any family with a child, and this does include pregnant women, cannot be discriminated against because they have children. And we're going to talk about what it means to discriminate against any of the protected classes. I think familial status comes up more frequently in the for rent situation than it does the for sale situation. You may have a landlord or a property manager that doesn't want a family with kids in the home or the unit, because let's face it, don't kids destroy stuff? They tear stuff up. They like to take their purple crayons to the walls, right? This is kids. You cannot be denied housing because you come with children. The children are a protected class. Familial status are the families with children and 18 and under. The R in fresh is race. It's the group of people that an individual was born into or has affiliated with their whole lives. I'll say it again. It's the group of people that an individual was born into or has affiliated with. Your physical genetic traits, for example, that makes up your race. Sex is referring to the individual's gender. Handicap or disability condition, any physical or mental impairment that limits one or more of life's major activities. I'll say it again. It's a physical or mental impairment that limits one or more of life's major activities. An individual cannot be denied housing because of their handicap disability status. And we're going to talk about landlords renting to a handicap disability tenant. Remember last night when we were talking about things that are not a material fact in North Carolina, and we talked about our stigmatized properties. And one thing, I don't have to volunteer it, but if you're ever asked if anybody in this home had AIDS or HIV, our answer is always, y'all have this written down yet? Federal fair housing prohibits me from answering that, whether you know or not. Federal fair housing prohibits me from answering that because those with AIDS or HIV are protected under the handicap status of fair housing. The C in corn is referring to color, the actual color of a person's skin. Or R in corn is religion, one's spiritual beliefs, an individual spiritual belief. And then our N is national origin, the country in which an individual is born or from where they derive, where their direct ancestors come from. I'll say it again. It's the country in which an individual was born or from where they derive, where their direct ancestors come from. So guys, these are your protected classes. We saw these spelled out in our agency agreements. One of the musts of our written agency agreement says that the broker nor the firm will discriminate against any of the protected classes, and it spells out for them. So this is what's up. Federal fair housing does not say, these are the protected classes. Don't you say anything bad about them. That's not what fair housing says. Fair housing says, these are the protected classes. Don't say anything at all. They're a protected class. Kind of reminds us about dual agency a little bit, right? You can talk about the property all day long, but we cannot talk about the people. And the people that fall under these protected classes, all of us, we cannot discuss the people. If they're not on this list, discriminate away. For example, do you see political affiliation on this list? Do you see career or job, what you do for a living? We could discriminate over the things not on this list. I wouldn't advise it, but we could. Federal fair housing can't guide us. That's why these are the protected classes. That's why these are the classes that are protected. Now, part of what we do, a big part of what we do, is to help educate the public. So maybe you're a property manager and somebody calls you and hires you to manage their property. And they say, look, I really don't want kids in here because those things are going to tear this house up and I just don't want them in the house. As the property manager, before I sign this agency agreement with this owner, I need to make sure that I explain to them that those kids are a protected class. And if they hire me, if their application fits, if they can prove their credit, if they can prove to us that they can live here, we cannot deny them the application because they have kids. If they refuse, don't enter into an agency agreement with them. My for sales agents, my residential agents, you very well may come across a seller that says, I refuse to sell my home to fill in the blank of a member of a protected class. And that's when we need to have the opportunity to look at that seller and say, I cannot discriminate. And because you're working with a broker, we cannot discriminate. The only thing the seller should care about with the buyers is, can they afford to buy my home? Do they come with a pre-qualification letter? Do they have the cash? But they should not be deciding on who can buy their home based on any of the protected classes. There's some really good literature out there. There's some good material to help us put words in our mouth when we're talking to the public to make sure that we are respecting them, of course, but that we're also in compliance with fair housing. Like we said, you guys, once a broker gets involved, that seller, even if you represent the buyer, let's pretend that seller is a for sale by owner. FSBO doesn't have a broker. They can discriminate if they choose. But once the buyer comes with a broker, now a broker's in the transaction and no discrimination can happen. Once you bring a broker into the transaction, discrimination goes out the window. Either side. I don't care who the broker's representing. Once you bring a broker into the transaction, nobody can discriminate. If they want to discriminate, they need to go for sale by owner and unrepresented buyer. Does that make sense? And don't you guys let them talk you into it. You could get paid on the transaction, but guess what? At the end of the trial, you could have to give your commission back. You could have to return it for the injured party. So again, we can talk about the property we can talk about the property all day long, but we cannot talk about the people. And it's my job to help educate the public. Sales agents, a common question you're going to hear from buyers is, I want a neighborhood for my kids to play in. Again, we're back to familia status. I want a neighborhood for my kids to play in. Okay, let's stop and talk about fair housing. Here's a Q&A brochure that I have from the Real Estate Commission that can help educate us on fair housing and help make us, aware and know what's going on. And then we can kind of try to direct the conversation away from the kids to the amenities. What are they really asking with kids in the neighborhood? Let's talk to them about schools and parks and various, rec centers, various things in the neighborhood that kids generally like to. We can help get them the information about the various things in the neighborhood. But I cannot look at a buyer and say, oh yeah, there's kids right up the street and they'll love playing with your kid. I cannot talk about the people. We just said earlier tonight, encourage your buyer to drive around the neighborhood before they buy. Tell them, I tell you, when we bought this house during the pandemic in 2020, I was here. I came out one morning, set my alarm, and I came out here at 6 o'clock in the morning because I wanted to see what my future house looked like at 6 o'clock in the morning. Do I live in a party neighborhood? I don't know. I came out here at 9 o'clock on a Friday night to see if it was quiet or not. Buyers should be encouraged to drive around, drive through the neighborhood at different times of day. And if they're doing that and there's kids in the neighborhood, aren't they eventually going to see them? So by encouraging them to drive through the neighborhood, learn the neighborhood that you want to move to, they're going to get their answers. So familial status definition, again, it does apply to the children. It doesn't apply to marital status. Does not apply to marital status. Marital status is not a protected class under fair housing. It's the family, specifically the family with children. So let's go back to being a property manager. You're a property manager and you have, I don't know, 15-story building. And the 14th floor unit is available. And a family of 5 comes in and fills out an application. Mom, dad, and 3 very, very little kids. You as a property manager may be nervous about having those kids up on the 14th floor. You could show them the available unit on the first floor. You could show them all of your available units. But bottom line, if their application is approved, if their credit checks out, and they really want to live on the 14th floor, I cannot deny them where they want to live because you are nervous about those small children being on the 14th floor. Does that make sense? I can show them everything I got, all the available units, but bottom line, if their application checks out, if their credit checks out, and that's where they want to be, I cannot deny them because they have those children. You know, we said fair housing, what you do for one, you do for all. So property managers, landlords, your application process needs to be the same. If you're going to pull a credit report for your prospective tenants, if you're going to pull a background check for your prospective tenants, which you do for one, you do for all. The other thing about fair housing, kind of the big picture, fair housing basically says that everybody, and I'm going to go back for a second so we can see everybody again. Fair housing basically says everybody, regardless of the protected class, everybody should have the right to live wherever they want to, as long as it's within their financial means. So that family with the 3 kids, if they want to live on the 14th floor, fair housing says, I can't deny that. I cannot deny that. And again, you guys, we're not running away from the conversation, but when it comes up, we need to be able to help educate the public. It's not the public's job to know my job. It's my job to know my job. And when they start acting, when we start hearing, and you're gonna, we just need to help point them in the right direction, help educate them. And bottom line, you guys, remember, you can decide before you enter into an agency agreement with anybody. And if that seller's talking to you like, I'm not going to let anybody with kids buy my house, then you have a decision to make. And I'm telling you, if you proceed, anything could be seen. You could, as the broker in the transaction, be facing the judge, be facing the real estate commission. With the landlord-tenant relationship, specifically with the handicap disability protection, the landlord can allow the tenant to make reasonable accommodations to the unit. So for example, a residential unit, if the tenant needs a ramp, if they're in a wheelchair and they need a ramp to get to the front porch, the landlord has to allow them to make those accommodations. If they want to install grab bars in the showers or lower the kitchen counters, The landlord can't deny the tenant from making those accommodations to accommodate the unit to meet their specific needs for their handicap disability. Now, the landlord doesn't have to pay for it. They can require the tenant to pay for those accommodations. And the landlord can also put something in the lease that requires the tenant to put it back to its original state prior to. So they can require the tenant to put it back at the end of the tenancy. Usually major modifications aren't going to happen. Where we're going to see major modifications is more in commercial places. Handicap disability status should also be able to access any public place. That's covered under the American with Disabilities Act. ADA, American with Disabilities Act. And what the ADA says is that everybody should have the same access to public spaces. So if the commercial building needs to make accommodations, maybe we need a couple handicap parking spaces out front. Maybe we put Braille on the elevators, for example. ADA is not going to make a business tear down the structure and rebuild. So you had a commercial building built in the 60s. ADA may not be, that main ADA wasn't around as much back then, so you may not have those. They're not going to make you come in and install an elevator. However, if you're doing major renovations or if you're going to tear down and rebuild, now you need to be in compliance with ADA, Americans with Disability Act. Federal fair housing is about where we live, the housing, the residential unit. ADA is public accommodations. Please write that down. Federal fair housing is about the residential unit. ADA is about public accommodation. And oftentimes the two work together. If you're a property manager of a major apartment complex, I mean, we've seen these massive apartment complexes where there's like 150 units for rent, for example. You're going to be dealing with both fair housing and ADA, because oftentimes with those large apartment complexes, those public accommodations come the clubhouse, the pool, etc.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Sorry, just the fair housing and the ADA part. The
Federal
first part.
Federal fair housing is about the housing. It's about where you live, the residential. ADA is public accommodations. ADA does not apply to all employers. Only 15 or more employees. So if your business has 14 employees, you don't have to follow ADA. Only if your business has 15 or more employees, that's when ADA kicks in. And again, it's making sure that everybody of the public has access to your business. So some accommodations, again, maybe some reserve parking, some handicap parking, some commercial buildings, we see the braille on the elevators, for example. Maybe the button to open the door, the push to open. These would be examples of accommodations that businesses can make for ADA. And as we said, with the landlord-tenant situation, if the tenant wants to install a ramp or grab bars in the shower, if their application checks out, their credit works out, whatever your screening process is for tenants, if it all checks out and this handicap disability tenant needs some sort of modification, the only thing the landlord can't do is say no. They have to allow the tenant to make whatever modifications or accommodations that they need. And again, it's going to be at the tenant's expense. And in the lease, the landlord can require that the property be put back to its original condition. So remove the ramp, bring the counters back up, etc. The landlord can't say no. So not protected. Again, unless it's fresh corn, it's not a protected class. Age, assuming that it's not a minor. Minors are protected under familial status, but once you turn 18, age is not a protected class. Marital status is not a protected class. Occupation, political affiliation. Yeah, Angel.
So is that why they have like communities that are 55 and above
Yep.
then,
Yep.
and they could advertise like that?
Yep, we're getting ready to talk about those and is an exception. Yep. You know, it's kind of funny to say, but let's say you have something for rent and you want to rent to somebody with steady income, somebody that you can see gets paid every other week. You could choose not to rent to, for example, a real estate agent. I don't get paid every other week, do I? I get paid when it closes. My commission isn't consistent. So you could choose not to rent to somebody because of their occupation. Again, you guys, what you do for one, you do for all, and we're never ever violating fair housing. So, some exemption. I get lots of questions, you guys. Please bear with me. Lots of questions about the exemptions to fair housing. And one exemption is an individual with less than 3 homes at one time, also referred to as the FSBO. So the for sale by owner that just has one unit every, 1 or 2 years, they only own 3 homes. Maybe this is the individual flipper. They just do this as a hobby, a couple homes a year, 1 or 2 homes a year. They are exempt from fair housing. However, just because you can doesn't always mean that you should. And like we said, you guys, if at any time during this transaction a real estate agent gets involved, the discrimination goes out the window. So federal fair housing exemption is the FSBO. Another exemption, the rental of a 1 to 4 unit owner occupied dwelling. So you have a duplex or a fourplex, for example. If you're going to live in one of the units, you can choose who's going to live in the others. So 1 to 4 unit owner occupied, duplex, triplex, quadplex.
Once it reaches 5 units, then you got federal fair housing laws.
Yep. Yep, 5 up. Now you're dealing with apartment complexes, that kind of thing. Yep.
But they still apply the FSBO, right? Because it's broken in both, we had to follow that.
Anytime an agent gets involved. Yep. Yep. Another exemption to fair housing, any units that are owned by a religious organization or a private club. They may own a property. Maybe the Elks Lodge has a cabin up in the mountains. Maybe the church has a parsonage. Any residence housing owned by a religious organization or a private club, they can choose to only allow their members to use it. So they would not have to follow the laws. They could discriminate in the sense that they only allow their members. Another exemption to fair housing since age. Once you turn 18, age is no longer a protected class. So we do have housings for older persons. There are a few restrictions. If the housing for older persons is 100% occupied by 62 or older, then they can say only 62 or older. Now, if it's mixed, you have some that are 62 and some that are like 55, then we don't have that 100%. We're going to see that next. So if you have 100% of your residents are 62 or older, then you can advertise, you can promote housing for older persons. So we see, retirement communities, various areas designated for 62 or older, and that's okay. But understand the only exemption here is the age. They still can't discriminate against color, race, religion, national origin, sex, etc. The only exemption here is the age. 100% occupancy. 55 and plus communities, I need at least 80% that are 55 or up. And again, the only exemption here is the age. We still can't discriminate against the other protected classes. So, I mean, could the grandkids pack up their little backpacks and go stay with grandma and grandpa this weekend?
Yes.
Sure, absolutely. Can they move in with grandma and grandpa? Not on the 62 or plus, not on the 100%. And in this one, we need at least 80% that's 55 or older. But they can advertise these housings as such.
So does that mean with the 80% that people under 55 can live in there?
20% is under 55.
Okay.
Usually it's how when these developments are being developed, it's how they're set up, how they're created. And they can be created just specifically for older persons. This is a great AI picture, isn't it? I was counting fingers and toes. I was counting fingers early to make sure everything was.
Looks rather normal.
The dog, checkers. I don't know. It don't look too bad if you ask me. Sign me up one day, eventually. We're getting there. Like we said, the FSBO, the for lease by owner, for sale by owner, for lease by owner can discriminate. They've not employed a broker. Nobody can use discriminatory advertising. So even this FSBO can't say certain protected class need not apply. They can't advertise or promote their discrimination. They can just choose silently who they want to sell their home to or who they want to lease their home to. With the advertising, I'd like you guys to turn with me in your book to page 84. And hopefully as you're looking around in your book, there's some good scenarios, some good descriptions in fair housing. So make sure you're looking through this unit for some examples. But specifically on page 84, fair housing kind of gives us some advertising guidelines, specifically brokers, advertising guidelines to make sure that we're in compliance. So you can kind of see what is or is not allowed. Triad MLS, I think it was 2023, something like that. They implemented a new software that if a potentially discriminatory word shows up in my advertisement, they're going to alert me. They're going to say, caution, make sure you're using this word appropriately. Now, they're not telling me not to use it, but they're just making me take a double check to make sure that this word or statement is used appropriately. I remember shortly after we got the software, after Triad MLS implemented the software, I was putting a listing in for one of our builders, and I was putting in the public remarks. I was typing in the public remarks, and we were advertising that the kitchen had white kitchen cabinets. and I got the alert. It alerted me to the word white. If I'm talking about white kitchen cabinets, am I okay? Sure. But it was just making sure I wasn't using the word to talk about the people, the neighborhood, right? So it's got these words that it kind of flags, which is helpful. You know, it's really eye-opening, but it's helpful. And it just kind of gives me the opportunity to make sure I'm proceeding correctly, properly, and I'm not misusing that advertising. The other thing for you guys to kind of keep in mind, as again, as society evolves, so does fair housing. So for example, back to our book on page 84, when we're talking about permitted, you got great neighborhood, master bedroom. A lot of MLSs have done away with master bedroom. And now what we're seeing is owner suite, primary bedroom. So even as we speak, you guys, fair housing is evolving. Things are changing. You guys, when you affiliate with your firms, you'll probably get fair housing reminders on the regular. NAR offers some great stuff on fair housing. They have a little, it's like a little simulation. You guys remember the books, you know, Choose Your Own Adventure, and you could decide which way you want to go. So they kind of have like a choose your own adventure simulation in a fictitious town called Fairhaven. And you are the broker of Fairhaven. And they give you a scenario and then you choose how to proceed and they let you know if you could have chose differently, chose better. So fair housing, this is very well the first time you're hearing about fair housing. I promise you it won't be the last. It's an ongoing thing. And you just need to be prepared for changes. What we're saying today may not apply tomorrow, not for your testing purposes, of course, but for, you know, just in general, in practice as a brokerage. April, NAR has dedicated April as Fair Housing Month. So that's usually when we get the good refresher, get the good update. That's funny. So it's always evolving, it's always changing. Rules and laws change, and fair housing is no different. So realtors, brokers under license law, we cannot discriminate. My client, when you see that word client, you know it's a broker involved. They hired a firm. The client cannot discriminate. The customer can, as long as there's not a broker involved in the transaction. Questions? All right, let's take a break. We come back, we're going to talk about some more discriminatory. We're going to talk about state fair housing as well. Welcome back. Take attendance. Remember the last section, you guys, we said that the BIC is responsible for all the advertisement that comes out of the firm. Federal fair housing and this discriminatory language, potential discriminatory language, is another reason to have your BIC proof it, just to make sure that everything is in compliance with not only your firm's laws or your firm's rules on advertising. You want to make sure that you're branding your firm, whatever their logo is, and you're using that logo properly. But also the BIC is probably on alert for potentially discriminatory language. And anything you send out to the public, isn't it just wise to have another set of eyes on it before you hit submit? I mean, I think about myself that cannot spell to save my life. So I definitely want somebody else to see it before it goes out. I know me, I know who I am. Anybody else feel my pain? So I want somebody, by the way, my BIC can't spell either. So we have a chief marketing officer that that we can rely on. They pick on us, but that's okay. That's okay. All right. This next little section, we're going to determine kind of some fact situations. We're going to talk about some other words: blockbusting, steering, redlining, and disparate impact. We're also going to talk about state fair housing. North Carolina fair housing has their own little set of rules. We're going to talk about how those compare to federal fair housing. In some cases, we have conflict of laws. Federal fair housing says one thing and state fair housing says another thing. Thank you. General rule of thumb: whenever you have conflicting laws or acts, the more restrictive of the two shall prevail. So we're going to compare those and talk about which one is going to win. Should this go to trial? Should this go to court? We're also going to talk about fair housing enforcement and the penalties for violation and kind of what that means for the broker. So if your client or even your customer feels that they were discriminated against, we can help point them in the right directions for enforcement, so they can investigate the case and determine if there was in fact discrimination, and if so, what those violations might be. So first, to kind of define some words revolving around discrimination. And one of those words is blockbusting. Please write something down for me. Blockbusting is about the owner. May that be for sale or for rent. Blockbusting is about the owner. Blockbusting is the attempt to encourage an owner to sell or lease their property because of the entry or the presence of a protected class into a neighborhood. Sell your house now, for example, rent your house now, because this fill in the blank of a protected class is moving into the neighborhood. There's a presence in the neighborhood. Encouraging somebody to sell or rent. You're busting the block. Or you're trying to bust the block. So blockbusting is about the owner. Exactly like a fear tactic. If blockbusting is about the owner, again, write this down for me. Steering is about the tenant or the buyer. If you're steering or channeling the tenant or buyer into or away from a neighborhood because of the presence or absence of a member of the protected class. I will say that again. If you're steering or channeling your buyer or tenant into or away from a neighborhood or an area because of the presence or absence of a protected class, that is not allowed. So block busting is about the owner, steering is about your tenant or buyers. Again, big picture fair housing. Everybody should have the right to live wherever they want, as long as it's within their financial means. Now, I'm not going to look at a person and say you should live here, but not here. If they want to live there and they can afford it, we're going to do it. Another discriminatory word language is called redlining. Again, write this down for me. Redlining is about the mortgage lenders. Once upon a time ago, mortgage lenders engaged in the practice of redlining. And what they did was put a map of the city up on the wall, and they would literally take their red marker, walk up to the map and say, we're not going to originate home loans here, here, or here. Nothing to do with the people, nothing to do with the property. They were redlining the neighborhood. Today, if you're denied a loan, it's because your debt to income ratio doesn't work out. Or in certain loan products, the property may not get approval. More to come on that in Unit 6. Redline is about the lender. They cannot not issue a loan because a property is located in a certain neighborhood. Disparate impact. This is when some policy or practice has an unintended effect of discrimination. It wasn't designed to discriminate, but it disproportionately impacts a protected class. So, I mean, like blanket policies, for example, may disproportionately impact a protected class. There's also some protections in place for the tenants when dealing with landlords about sexual harassment. The landlord, I mean, can't sexually harass the tenant. They also can't demand any kind of sexual act in exchange for rent or low rent, for example. So there's laws in place to protect the tenants. Make a note. I wouldn't suggest using your study time on it, but once you guys get licensed, if you want to, there's a film about housing discrimination. It's really eye-opening. You may just want to make a note. It's called Matter of Place. You can find it on YouTube. Again, don't spend your study time on this, but it may be something to think about later, especially as you're getting going in your career. But the literature, the education out there, there's so many good resources. The Real Estate Commission, the National Association of Realtors. Another one of my super simple philosophies, you guys, is when in doubt, find out. So if you're not sure, get with your BIC. Go to your BIC. Go to the Real Estate Commission's website. Do your research, like with anything else. Fact check it. You guys believe everything you see on the Google? Fact check it. If something's raising a flag for you, then fact check it and educate yourself so you can be better to the clients, you can be better to the public. So let's talk about how federal fair housing is enforced. If somebody feels that they were discriminated against because they're a member of the protected class, when they are trying to purchase or rent property, again, note the word housing. We're referring to where you live, to your house. And if anybody feels that they've been discriminated against, the complainant can file a complaint through HUD, Housing and Urban Development. HUD will investigate. They'll gather documentation. They'll talk to all parties involved. They'll put the pieces of the puzzle together to determine if there was in fact discrimination or not. If there was, then they will act accordingly. They may require training. They may require education. They may fine you. They may require you to pay back your commission because you injured that party. So you may have, if you've been paid, you may have to give that commission back. They may also turn you over to the judge and let the court trial. The commission may as well. There could also be some fines if it goes to court. There could also be some fines. First violation, you don't need to know these numbers. You will not be tested on these numbers. They're just more just to kind of help us see. And as you can see, those fines go up on the second violation. Guess what? The third violation goes up even further. So if you don't learn the first time, hopefully the second time. Anybody, the real estate commission and the court could put an injunction on you. If they put an injunction on you, then you are not working while this matter is being investigated. An injunction is a legal stop.
As far as working as a real estate agent,
Yep. Also, with federal fair housing enforcement, Civil Rights Act of 1866 requires that the individual action by filing a civil suit. So again, once enforcement, once HUD gets involved, if they can't resolve it, then it very well may be going to court. And court cases is often how we get our rules. Court cases is often how we get the new laws. So all these court cases, we saw a couple examples a few minutes ago, these court cases shape where we are today. They create where we are today to prevent us from being here tomorrow. Justice Department can file a suit for repeated offenses. We mentioned E&O insurance last night. Guys, E&O insurance is not going to cover the broker for discriminatory acts. We're going to talk about the broker's responsibility, what you and I need to know. So what we've been talking about so far is federal fair housing. That's like national, guys. Every country in the state has to follow that. Each state is also allowed to adopt their own fair housing. So North Carolina adopted their fair housing. We have North Carolina fair housing. Here's the good news. North Carolina's protected classes are the same as federal fair housing's protected classes. Some states vary, some states have more protected classes than federal. But the good news for us, fresh corn applies to North Carolina fair housing as well. So those protected classes, federal and North Carolina state. North Carolina State Fair Housing came to be, I want to say mid-80s. So again, this is not that old. And although the protected classes are the same, some of the exemptions differ. Now, I might have bumped on some moral compasses when I was talking about exemptions of fair housing. And that very well might be why North Carolina State Fair Housing is here today, to alleviate some of those concerns that we might have just had. Put real estate aside for a second. Pretend real estate doesn't exist. Whenever you have conflicting laws, the stricter of the two will prevail. So when we're in North Carolina and we're faced with conflict between federal and North Carolina, the courts will tend to lean more towards the stricter one, the stricter of the two. So looking at those exemptions, guess what? North Carolina fair housing does not allow the for sale by owner or the for rent by owner to discriminate. Does that make us feel a little bit better? Federal allows it, state does not. Which one is more strict? I can see mouths move. State. So in North Carolina, can the for sale by owner discriminate? No, thanks to North Carolina fair housing. You need to be familiar with both. That state fair housing does not exempt that for sale by owner or that for lease by owner. Federal law said you could discriminate owner occupied 1 to 4 dwellings, 1 to 4 units. State law says owner occupied or a member of your family. So 1 to 4 units, owner or your family, discriminate. Again, fair housing says owner only. State says owner and family. Which one's more strict?
Owner?
In that case, federal, the owner only. So that will be the one that prevails. Again, if this goes to a court, the judge is going to look at where did the complaint come from? That's always one of the first questions they are going to ask. Did it come from the state level or did it come from the federal level? And generally speaking, they're going to lean more towards the stricter of the two. The other thing that state has that federal does not, this exemption to state is not covered under federal. And this is what I was struggling to say earlier. Single sex dormitory or zero dwelling. This is like our studio apartments, our dorm rooms, military barracks, etc. Those are exempt from fair housing in the state of North Carolina. All of our college campuses down in Fayetteville, we have big military bases. There's single sex dormitory, also known as zero bedroom dwelling, studio apartments, things like that, are going to be exempt under state. So we talked about enforcement for federal level. We said HUD was the enforcement. So in other words, if somebody wants to file a complaint on the federal level, then HUD's going to step in and do the investigation. The division of HUD is going to step in and do the investigation. Enforcement on the state level is the North Carolina Human Relations Commission. So the complainant makes their complaint to the North Carolina Human Relations Commission. They're going to investigate it. They're going to talk to all parties involved. They want to see documentation. And if they find that discriminatory action has occurred, then they will take the appropriate steps going forward. All complainants, just FYI, all complainants, whether on the federal or the state level, have up to 1 year after the incident to file the complaint. After that year, they may have lost that right to file the complaint. The statute of limitations on that is 1 year. So if a client or customer or consumer comes to you and they feel that they've been discriminated against, we need to encourage them to go forward sooner rather than later, because I don't want that 1 year to get away from them.
That's federal.
One thing that, I'm sorry?
It's federal and state.
Yep, 1 year. One thing that the state might do is to obtain voluntary cooperation. Again, they may require additional training or education. They may make you take a class or two. And if we don't have cooperation, if it's a repeat offense, the first time they might slap you on the wrist, the second time they make you take this training course, right? They kind of build on it. But after a while, then eventually it may wind up in state court. I had a pre-licensing student several years ago, and she worked at one of those large apartment complexes that we see, like the massive ones. I think she said they had like 250 tenants. And the poor thing came in frazzled, especially the first of the month, because everybody was paying rent. But she shared with us, because they provided housing, they had to follow fair housing rules, but also because they had 15 or more employees and they had public spaces, they had to follow ADA as well. And so they had to follow both. And she shared with us, you guys ever worked in a restaurant? You know that they send in secret shoppers. They have somebody come into your restaurant and order dinner and then rate you and the food and the experience. Federal Fair Housing and ADA would do the same thing. They would call and say things or have people come by and try to do things, not trying to bait them, but just to make sure that they weren't falling into these traps. And they would call and come by, she said, on the regular, to make sure that they were in compliance with Federal Fair Housing and ADA. And she said there were a few times that they didn't follow the proper protocol. So they would make, the employees take this training course or watch this training video, that kind of thing. Guys, they don't want to punish you out the gate. Let's try to educate you first so we don't make these mistakes going forward. Does that make sense? I mean, they're not going to throw you in jail on your first offense. It takes a while to get there if you don't learn the first couple times. So they're going to give you opportunities to start acting appropriately going forward. And this, again, is why training and education is very important with fair housing. Rest assured, we're just introducing this to you. Rest assured, there's much more to come when you affiliate with your firms, as you sit through your sales meetings. So like we said, here it is in writing with federal and state law. Any conflict, the courts are going to lean more towards the restrictive, whichever is more strict. That's what I'm saying. Whichever one is stricter, that's the one that will prevail. It's a lot, you guys. Again, I'm just introducing you to it. If you have not yet, I really encourage you, page 86 of your book, 87 of your book, 88 of your book, 90 of your book, gives you some scenarios. And I think it's one thing to sit down and read the law, but I think it's another thing to see these real world, these case studies came from real world scenarios. So I encourage you to look those over, help you get a better understanding. So let's bring it home. When it comes to fair housing, what's this mean for us? This is important. Whether you meant to or not, appearing to discriminate could be seen as a discriminatory practice. Treating anybody differently than everybody else could be seen on the surface as a discriminatory act. Guys, it's not necessarily your actions, it's how you made somebody feel. Let's say you're doing an open house on Sunday, one of your listings, and you have yourself positioned at the front door, one for safety. We're going to talk about agent safety, but you have yourself positioned at the front door And you're greeting everybody as they come in. And as everybody comes into your open house, you're thanking them for coming. You're telling them to make sure they stop by the kitchen and have a fresh baked cookie and sign your open house registry. And the next group comes in and you say, thank you for coming. Make sure you sign my registry and have a cookie. And the third group and the fourth group. And then maybe you get busy. Maybe you're on your phone or you're talking to somebody and another group comes in and you don't get to tell them that. And then the sixth group comes in and you say, have a cookie and sign my registry. That one group that you did not ask to sign your registry, could you have made them feel like you treated them differently than everybody else that came into your open house? And you didn't mean to. I know you didn't mean to, but how did you make them feel? So what we do for one, we do for all. If you don't want to invite them to sign your registry, then just hope they find it. If you tell one to sign your registry, you need to tell others all, because otherwise it could appear that you don't want that one group in your open house to sign your registry. So the appearance of discrimination, whether you went to or not, it's how you made somebody feel. Does that make sense? So this takes us back to what you do for one, you do for all. Can you have them a sign stating the welcome? Absolutely. You could put a sign up that says, have a cookie in the kitchen, have a cookie and sign the registry, and you've covered your bases, right? I try to talk to everybody, but like I said, I was just making that up. I'm not on my phone in an open house when there's people in the house. Now if I'm alone, that's a different story because I got to kill time. But I'm greeting people as they come in. I'm greeting them when they come in and I'm thanking them when they leave. And we got to make everybody feel the same. Does that make sense? Again, I know we have pure hearts. I know we do. It's not your actions. It's not your intent. It's how you treated somebody differently than everybody else. And to that one person you treated differently, it could be seen as a discriminatory action. So if this gets investigated, HUD doesn't need to have proof of your intent. They're not here to protect you. They're here to protect the party that felt like you discriminated. What you do for one, you do for all. That's why it's called equal housing opportunity. You guys see the equal sign in the house? It was not that long ago that I saw, it was like I was today years old kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah, there's why. That's why there's that equal sign in the house. That's why this is equal housing opportunity. And like we said, back to my former pre-licensing student, they could send in testers. They could have you call, they could have come in and fill out an application just to see how you treat them. Maybe they'll send in different groups of different colors of people. Maybe they'll send in different groups of different religion to make sure that you're treating everybody that comes into your property management, your apartment complex, the same, regardless of how they look. You don't have to dig deep to find out that we all look different. And how we look has absolutely nothing to do with housing. Everybody should have the right to live wherever they want, as long as it is within their financial means. Questions on this? Comments? What if you have a policy as a broker that, again, we're going to talk about agent safety. So for example, you have a policy that says you're never going to meet a buyer for the first time at a property by yourself, no matter how bad they want to see it. Trust me, if they want to see the property that bad, you are the professional in this transaction. So they'll do what you want them to. And if you want to bring them into the office, or if you want to take them to a Starbucks and have a coffee, if that's your policy, then that's what you're going to do for every single buyer. I have a great tool at my disposal. I have a great excuse to meet a member of the public in a public place before we tour a home. Can I use my working with real estate agent disclosure? Say, I have a document that we need to go over before I show you this property. So meet me at the road at Starbucks. I'll be happy to buy your coffee. By the way, talk to your accountant because that might be a tax write-off for you. But you can have them in a public place. You can bring them into the office before a buyer consultation. And if that's your policy, then that's what you do for every single buyer to avoid discrimination. I mean, if I only did that for my, if I only did that for my male buyers, but I was okay with meeting my female buyers at the property without that consultation, isn't that seen as a form of discrimination? So what you do for one, you do for all. Questions, comments? And I need to stop sharing while you guys are, so just bear with me 1 second if I have any questions. I'll stop sharing again. I think with fair housing, the most uncomfortable situation I've ever been in. I had a buyer coming from out of town. He was a USAA. He came from USAA. He was coming from out of town for like 3 or 4 days to look at properties because he was moving here like, later in the year. So he flew up from Florida just to look at properties for those 3 or 4 days. And y'all, I talked to this man for weeks about his property tours when he came to town. And I wasn't with him all day, every day for 4 days, but we were together a lot. And I talked to this man for weeks before we finally met, before he showed up. And in all the times I talked to him, he never once shared with me that he was going to bring his 3-year-old son. He was going to bring his wife, who was 5 months pregnant with twins, and he was going to bring his elderly father. Now, what that meant to me, as soon as all these people getting out of the car, was that Julie didn't plan enough bathroom breaks because I didn't know there were all these people that would have to stop as often as what they did. It would have been nice if I knew that before I met him. So we had to regroup a little bit, but it all works. So we were looking at properties when we first met, and his dad, every single property we walked up to, about the first 2 or 3, it didn't go on much longer. But the first home we walked up to, we're still standing on the porch, and his dad was like, tell me about the neighbors. Who lives here? I don't know. I know the neighborhood on Google, but it's not like I've gone door to door to figure out. And so I kind of just, I don't want to say I blew it off, but I kind of blew it off because I didn't know where he was going at first. Second house we went to, he was like, what do you know about the neighbors? Third house. And I'm like, where's this guy going? I have a feeling I know where he was going. And I don't know why any of that would have mattered to him because he wasn't the one buying. But even if he was, it shouldn't have mattered. But eventually, after about the 3rd time, his son kind of squashed it and said, Dad, she doesn't know. She's selling the house. She doesn't know the people. And I thought, thank you. To this day, I'm still not exactly sure where he was going, but it makes me wonder what he was fishing for, what he was looking for. He caught me off guard. I'm not going to lie. He caught me off guard because I never had a definitive, this is why I'm asking. Was he asking me about the racial makeup of the neighborhood? Was he asking me about the employment of the neighborhood? I don't know, but I'm not out there selling the neighborhood. I'm selling the property. I'm selling, remember, I'm the expert of my market. So helping them get that location, get that property. And I'm not going to lie, I was pretty grateful for the son. Dad, she doesn't know. I was like, thank you, because I didn't have to attempt a conversation that could have been uncomfortable had I been wrong. Does that make sense? But this is the kind of thing to kind of be alert on. Was he asking me about the neighborhood? No, he was asking me about the neighbors. And I went back to my training that said I can talk about the property all day long, but we cannot talk about the people, even if I did know the people. This is the kind of thing that we have to be on alert for. Somebody just put in the chat, did they buy from me? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I was writing up the offer. He got on the plane like 3 days later and I was writing up the offer. So as soon as he landed, he could sign his offer, present it. We went under contract. And his dad wasn't even buying. His dad was just along for the ride, you know? So, my response to that about within it, like I said, the first time I kind of blew it off. The second time I was like, wait a minute. And then it wasn't much past the third time that the son was like, Dad, she doesn't know. Of course, this man, y'all, every single room I walked in, he would like stop in the doorway, like stop, walk in, just stop in the doorway and turn around, look at me and go, where's the light switch? Like, well, I'm guessing it's on the wall, either to the right, to the left. He expected me to know a heck. I'm seeing this house for the first time too, sir. And I'm assuming that the light switch is either to the left or the right, but I couldn't get to it because he was like stopped in the middle, you know. So some people are fun, you know, but just be careful. Just be careful, you guys. Make sure you stop and think. And again, what I was grateful for in that situation, I still to this day don't know where he was heading. I have an idea. But when that comes up for your case, just make sure that we're not annoying it, we're not avoiding it, we're just helping to educate it. And had I go on, I'd have been like, sir, the what makes up this neighborhood, the people that make up this neighborhood are what make the neighborhood. If the son's interested in the property, then we're going to proceed with the property, because that's what I'm selling, is the property. Questions? Fair housing. Again, I encourage you to look at the scenarios. I know your heart is pure, but it's how you make others feel. Everybody good with that? It's not your intent. It's how you make others feel. So let me come back and get you guys. Big deep breath. And onward we go. This last section is going to, or this section is going to be on measurements. Again, we're going to get through it. You can see in your book, it's only 2 pages. We are going to get into a little bit of math in this section about measuring. Some of it we've already talked about when we talked about measuring our land. So we're going to kind of revisit that and also talk more specifically. What this is focusing on is measuring a house, my responsibilities for measuring the house. Do I have to measure it? Can I hire somebody, etc.? So in this section, we are going to talk about what living area is, above grade, below grade, and square footage of a property. We're going to teach you how you determine what is considered total heated square footage and what may not count. Not everything under the roof is going to count as total heated square footage. We're also going to help you determine the area of a lot, so we can help with those lot dimensions a little bit, helping our buyers and sellers get to the square footage of a lot. We already know. What's that magic number? How many acres are in, or how many square feet are in 1 acre?
43,560.
43,560. Yep. So we've already visited this a little bit. So we're going to revisit that again. So the question burning on everybody's mind right now: are listing brokers required to measure a home? What do you guys think? Yay or nay? I can see head bobs. Are we required to measure a home? The answer is nope, I'm not required. I can hire somebody to measure for me. I can hire somebody that has experience, that has knowledge on what the real estate commission considers square footage. If you are hiring somebody to measure for you, the real estate commission has provided us with guidelines. So if you want to hire somebody, they first off need to know what they're doing. And then you need to make sure that you get them the square footage guidelines and they're doing it according to the standards of the real estate commission. If you're going to measure yourself, you need to get your hands on those guidelines and you need to make sure that you're doing it according to the real estate commission standards. I'm getting there, hang on. Whether you measure it yourself or you hire somebody, whatever you list it must be accurate. So the question is, are we required to make sure that the square footage is correct? Yes, regardless of whether you do it or you hire somebody to do it for you. Guys, I'm not going to lie. Of all the agents I know, I could probably break them up 50-50. Half of them measure their own listings. The other half don't trust their math skills. They don't want to play around with it. So they hire somebody to do it. There's no wrong way. It comes down to time versus money. If you're doing it yourself, that's your time. If somebody else is doing it for you, that's your money, right? So kind of what's most important to you. People aren't going to measure your property for you for free.
Who pays for that?
Well, you do. Part of
Okay.
your marketing, budgeting dollars. Yep.
That's the marketing part. Okay.
Yep. So time versus money. Do you want to take your time or do you want to have your money? Could you ask the seller to pay for measurements? Well, yeah, but think about it. Seller's a competitive listing appointment. They're talking to 3 brokers. 2 are saying, I'll take care of the measurements. And you're saying, I'm going to make you pay to have it measured. You just kind of hurt yourself a little bit, right? So standard, that's part of taking a listing. One way or another, having those measurements. So listing brokers required to measure. All right, let's see. What about a buyer's agent? Is a buyer's agent required to measure a home?
No.
I'm seeing no's, I'm hearing no's, and I would agree unless, there's always that, right? Buyer's agents aren't required to measure unless you don't feel that the measurements reported are accurate, or if your buyer questions it. If your buyer client questions it, don't I owe it to them to make sure that it's accurate? So buyer's agents, for the most part, we can rely on what is in MLS, unless it doesn't appear to be accurate or your buyers question it. Guys, I have 0 dimensional spatial abilities. I cannot walk into a room and say my couch is going to fit on this wall. I have 0 spatial abilities. And I cannot walk into a room and say, oh, this is about 250 square feet. I just don't have that mental piece of my brain. It went somewhere else. However, I should be able to recognize the difference between a 1,200 square foot house and a 2,500 square foot house. And if that 1,200 square foot house is advertised as 2,500, I can't tell you it's 1,200, but it sure as heck doesn't look 2,500 to me. So whenever you think that it's off, whenever you think, then we have a duty to make sure for our buyer clients that it's accurate. The Real Estate Commission says that the total square footage is not a material fact. The Real Estate Commission does not require us to report square footage. However, many of our MLSs do. I can't put a listing into MLS without a measurement. So the commission doesn't require it, but many of our MLSs do. And the commission says, if you're going to report it, it must be accurate. They provide us with a little booklet that we're going to take a glance at after class. It's in Learn Test Pass for you. And if you're measuring a residential property, then we're going to use the North Carolina Real Estate Commission's residential square footage guidelines. It's exactly what it is. It's a guideline to make sure that it's accurate, to make sure that it's being measured properly. Well, according to the commission standards. So Julie, you're telling me I have to measure it. Can I just pull up the tax records or the builder's blueprints, or even look at the previous listing when another agent had it listed and they measured it? Can't I just? And the answer to all three of those is no. Tax records are very rarely right. Builders' blueprints fluctuate from when they put it out on the piece of paper to they actually build it. And then the previous listing, remember, I can't take somebody else's work. So I can look at MLS and I can see what the previous agent listed it for, but I can't take their work. The only way you can report square footage is if you measure it yourself or you hire somebody to do it for you, somebody that knows what they're doing. Y'all don't hire the 18-year-old down the street to go measure your listing. I want like somebody that does this for a living, maybe a general contractor, an appraiser. An appraiser is a great one to do our measuring. How can I identify potential issues? I can look at the tax records. The tax records, what they can do for me is help me identify unpermitted space. The tax records are only going to report permitted space. Remember, when I do come across unpermitted space, I have to disclose that it's not permitted. So the tax records, look at the tax records, but do not rely on them for your square footage. The other thing that we need, or another thing that we need to be aware of, is above grade and below grade. Above grade is when a floor or a level of a home doesn't touch earth. Below grade is when at least one side touches earth. So maybe it's an underground basement. Maybe it's a basement where just one side touches earth. If one side touches earth, it's below grade. Now, you and I don't care as much about above grade and below grade as the appraiser does. The appraiser really cares about below grade space. The appraiser's not going to put as much value on below grade space as what they do above. So when I'm helping the seller price the property, or when I'm helping the buyer determine how much they want to offer, I need to be aware of this and let them know that finished basement isn't going to have the same value as the first floor, as the second floor. So we want to take that into consideration. Then obviously if it's permitted or unpermitted, finished or not finished. Let's go ahead and take our break. A lot more to say about measurements. Yeah, this is even our last break, isn't it? Goodness. All right, let's take 10. How we holding up for the last hour? Doing good, trucking right along. Anybody else fight the urge to have caffeine this late at night? Or are you one of those lucky people that doesn't bother you?
I did that last night and I did that yesterday and that was the worst thing I could ever have done. I didn't go to bed until 1 o'clock.
Oh, yeah, we got to
So I
learn that
have,
one the hard way. Yeah.
I've been caffeine free for 2 weeks and I'm dying. I've
Oh,
literally
wow.
gone on this like I took out soda and everything and I've only been drinking water for 2 weeks straight.
Good for you. Good
You
for
go,
you.
girl. Because I could never.
Then I got another one that says she's got a coffee in her hand. So, yep, you're one of those. All right, let's go ahead and take attendance. Hold your non-alcoholic beverages up. We'll take attendance. Cheers. All right. Let's see. Before we go back in here, I want to share with you from Learn Test Pass, the Unit 5 material. And you can see within the Unit 5 material, they have the real estate commissions. There it is. Square footage guidelines. When you affiliate with your firm, this thing is a very nice brochure. Or as you can see, you also get the PDF. So when you affiliate with your firm and they start talking about their expectations, you know, some firms want you to hire somebody. They may even have somebody that does their measurements that you can rely on. Some firms may ask that you at least try. You know, how do you know if you want to measure a house or not until you actually just let go with somebody and measure a house? So either way, again, whether you're doing it or somebody else is doing it, we need to be familiar how the commission expects us to report it. Because as we're just going to see in a minute, no matter who measures, the listing agent is responsible. So we want to make sure that you know, you understand what's going on. Now I've went ahead and downloaded this so we can, oh, I thought I pulled it up. Hang on. I'm sorry. I got it in my downloads. I just got to grab it real quick. And I'm not going through the whole booklet because you're not going to be tested on the whole booklet. But what I want to do look at are the things, you know, the testable points. So let me come back and grab you guys. And we can pull up the PDF where we can actually see it. And make a note for me. Dude, that's funny, I blend in. Make a note for me. Pages 4 and 5. You guys see how the PDF over here, it says page 4 of 32 and then page 5 of 32. Does everybody see this? It's not the page number in the booklet. It's the page number of the PDF. So pages 4 and 5 of the PDF are what we are talking about, thus what you need to know for your exam. Does everybody see that? So if you're looking at the booklet, it's pages 2 and 3. If you're looking at the PDF, it's 4 and 5. I do encourage you guys to look at this. Again, we're getting ready to talk about your living heat area criteria. This talks about above grade and below grade, and then a couple specifics that we're going to hit on. Not so much page 5. Look over page 5. Page 4 is the big one to look over for your exams. But just to kind of scroll through and show you the rest, this is a pretty handy dandy. I mean, it's a guidelines. So it goes over a lot of information, commission's expectations. They do 1/10 of an inch instead of a 1/12 metric system. But the cool thing about this booklet is it actually gives you some mock floor plans and it kind of shows you different styles of homes. So if you're out with a 1-story with a basement and a carport, what that might look like. Basement with a carport, that's the worksheet. Here's a mock for a 2-story with a foyer, right? So it's just some different mock floor plans to help you when you guys get out there in the real world. But again, 4 and 5 on the PDF numbers, with the most attention on page 4. So one thing that we saw on page 4 The big thing to understand. All right, no tax record, blueprints, or previous listings. By the way, also, don't rely on the seller. Don't look at the seller and say, what's the square footage of your home? Because there's a really good chance that they don't know. So the only way that we can report it is if either I measure it or I have somebody that knows what they're doing measure it for me. So what is living area? We're going to talk about HFDA. There's 3 criteria that we have to have in order to count it. It's total living area, heated living area. You can see this called a couple different things. Like we said, you guys, not everything under the roof counts. So before I can report it as living area, total heated living area, however you see it, it's got to have these 3 things. First off, it has to be heated by a permanent heating source. You cannot put a space heater in a room and say that it's heated. It's got to be heated by a permanent heating source. Note that says heated. That does not say air conditioned. Air conditioning is a luxury. Heating is a requirement. So it's got to be heated. It's got to be finished according to generally accepted building practices. When I say it's finished, I mean we need ceiling, we need flooring, we need walls. I can't be looking at unfinished spaces, rafters, studs. We need ceilings, flooring, and walls. Ceiling height needs to be at least 7 feet. Ceiling height needs to be at least 7 feet. Now let's talk about that for a second. You could very well find an older home, a historic home, where the bedrooms are upstairs, for example, and the bedroom ceiling height is not 7 feet. You know, 120 years ago, we were a lot shorter, weren't we? And we weren't building homes as tall as what we are today. So if you come across something where the ceiling height isn't at least 7 feet, then you can't count it in the total heated living area. I can advertise it and I can promote it, but I can't count it in the total heated living area. By the way, if that ceiling height, if it's in an attic or a bonus room that fits this criteria and the ceiling walls are sloped, then the criteria is 5 feet from the lowest part of the slope. So when you have sloped, like you're looking at this attic right here, these sloped walls, if that space is heated and finished in the 3rd piece, then the lowest part of the slope has to be 5 feet. Again, if it's not, then I just can't count it as the living area, but I can still put it in my remarks. I can still advertise it because that's still good space. So it's got to be heated, it's got to be finished, and it has to be directly accessible. Directly accessible means you go from heated finished room to heated finished room to heated finished room. It's all got to connect. If the space in between isn't heated or finished then you can't count it. Let's say, for example, you have a listing or you're looking at a property that has a finished room over the garage. They've taken the space above the garage and they've enclosed it, they finished it, they have heat, maybe it has its own little bathroom or whatever. But to get to the stairs, to get to that room over the garage, you have to go through the unfinished, unheated garage. That finished room over the garage is not directly accessible, thus I can't count it. In order for me to count it as total heated living area, I must have all 3. Now, this is about the time of the class I start getting a lot of questions. You know somebody that has space and you want to know that it counts. I can't see it, so I can't answer that question. But you can ask yourself, is it heated? Direct source. Is it finished? Does it have ceiling, walls, and floors? And is it directly accessible? Can you go from space to space to space? Good rule of thumb, if you walk outside of the room and you get cold, then it's not going to be directly accessible. It's got to connect. Closets count. You know, utility closets, things like that are going to count because they're part of the room. Must have all three. Questions on this?
Can you please repeat about the air conditioner? You said just count heating, right? Just
It's a
heat.
luxury. AC is a luxury. So we don't need AC to count it as living area. We just have to
Oh,
have heat.
thank you.
This makes me long for the days that we can turn our air conditioning back on. Soon. Three things. And this is what that is on that page 4. So page 4 of that booklet goes over these three, and then again above grade and below grade. Page 5 starts talking about ceiling heights, things like that.
So I say like, yeah, like how they redo the basements and then put like a mini unit, AC unit or heating unit in there. Would that still count since it's two separate units?
If it's permanently installed, like you can't put a space heater, kerosene heater, thing like that. But if they do install a separate heater in another, because you might have a different heater for different levels, absolutely. Absolutely.
Like how you see like the ductless units.
Yeah. As long as it's permanently installed. Yep. Because you could have older homes that have like central heat, which means they have like, they don't have ductwork. They just have, you know, heating. This is an old house, a heating unit in the middle of the house, and then it kind of generates throughout. You know, that's getting kind of gray area right there, you know, because it's not permanently installed in each room. It's just that central heating. Gas heater in a basement work again. Is it permanently installed, or did you just bring that gas heater in? Permanently installed means you just can't pick it up and take it with you from room to room. So if it's permanently attached, you know, it's kind of like a fixture in a way that it's meant to be permanent, in a way that it's meant to stay. You guys got this written down? Highlighted and starred? Highlight it and star it. Does this sound like a test question? All right, let's see. So when we're going to measure, typically when we're getting the total living area, we're going to start outside and we're going to go from corner to corner to corner. We're going to get all the square footage under the roof. And then we're going to go inside and deduct the spaces or space that doesn't count. So we're going to start with everything under the roof. And then we're going to go inside and we're going to deduct, for example, the garage, because the garage generally is not heated. The garage is generally not finished. If it is, then you can count it. If the attic is finished and heated and directly accessible, you can count it. Basement, etc. Heated, finished, and directly accessible. So we go outside, measure corner to corner to corner to corner of the house, get everything under the roof, and then we go inside and deduct what doesn't count. If you're measuring a property where you can't get to the outside, let's say, for example, and y'all, I'm not an artist, so just bear with me here. But let's say, for example, you're measuring one of those homes. We can't really see that. You're measuring one of those homes that, like, the first story, here's the first story, and then the second story is a little bit bigger than the first story. The second story kind of sticks out a little bit. So the second story is a little bit bigger. If they're the same, then I can measure the first story and then say times 2. But if the second story is bigger, I can't safely measure outside, and I never want y'all on a ladder measuring. Promise me you will never get on a ladder and measure anything or expect somebody to do it for you. Thank you. So you can measure the first floor, stay on the ground, But if the second floor is a different size than the first level, then we go inside and we measure exterior walls. An exterior wall means on the other side is the outside. So we go inside, we measure the exterior walls, and then we add 6 inches. That takes into account the wall. So for some reason you can't get, what if it's a below ground basement and you can't get to it unless you dig down into the dirt, into the earth? We're going to go inside. If it's heated and finished and directly accessible, we're going to go inside, measure the exterior walls, and then add 6 inches to account for the wall. Yep. The exception to this, all good rules have an exception. The exception to this is if you're measuring a condo. Condo owners just own from paint to paint. So you go inside, you measure the exterior walls, and you do not add 6 inches because the HOA owns the walls. We're just getting in the condo from paint to paint to paint. So as long as it's heated, finished, and directly accessible, a really good rule of thumb, if you can walk on it, then you can count it. If you can't walk on it, then you can't count it. So think about, for example, cathedral ceilings. You might have the grand foyer when you walk in the front door that is 2 stories. Your second story isn't the same as your first because you have a whole one room that's 2 stories. So now we got to go upstairs and measure the second story that you can actually walk on. You can't make up space. You can't make up floor space. So if you can't walk on that second story because you'd fall into the great room. So if you can't walk on it, you can't count it. So the what ifs and the what abouts. Stairs, generally speaking, stairs, take the stairs. You got your, here, let's try and draw a picture. Let's see how this works out for us. Again, I don't, but we might be able to get the idea. So I have a staircase. Humor me. Does everybody see a staircase? Okay, so I have a staircase. Staircases would actually count on both levels. They're going to count on the first floor. And then if we put an imaginary hinge on the staircase, the stairs themselves would be part of the second floor. If we were to take the stairs and fold them up, I have space on the second floor and I have space on the first. So the stairs are going to count twice. They're going to count on the first floor from where they descend. And we're going to kind of hinge them up. The stairs themselves would be the second floor. The space underneath the stairs would be part of your first floor square footage. What about bonus rooms, specifically in the attic? Again, is it heated? Is it finished? And is it directly accessible? Bonus rooms and attics is particularly where we might see those sloped walls. So the sloped walls in a bonus room, heated, finished, and directly accessible. And then I need a ceiling height of at least 5 feet at the lowest part of the slope. Bay windows, some bay windows have a bay window is a part of the house that kind of juts out. So you don't have a perfectly rectangle, you just have a piece that kind of juts out, maybe in a dining room or a breakfast room or something like that. If it's heated, finished, and directly accessible, and its ceiling height is at least 7 feet, then I can count the bay window. If not, then I can't. Some bay windows have a bench. If I can't walk on it, I can't count it. Again, you guys, please hear me. I can advertise it. I can promote it. I'm going to put it in my remarks. Really cool bay window to sit and drink your coffee and read your morning paper, right? I can promote it. I just can't include it when I'm advertising the square footage. It could be a great selling point of the home, but it can't be in my total living area. That's right. Stairs count on each level. So the second level and the first that you can walk on. And then garages, again, is it heated? Is it finished? Is it directly accessible? Get used to asking yourself that. And if the answer to any 3 of those questions is no, then I can't include it in my total heated square footage. I need 3 yeses to be able to include it. So do any of these count? Well, our favorite answer is, it depends. Is it heated, finished, and directly accessible? So we started outside, we measured everything under the roof, we measured everything outside, and then like we said, we're going to come inside and remove the places, porches, unfinished areas such as the garage that does not have that heated, finished, and directly accessible. Yeah, Tiffany.
I just have a question about the stairs. Can you repeat what you said again, please?
It's going to count on both levels because I got space under the stairs. And then if I put my stairs on a little hinge, now they're up on the second floor, like an imaginary hinge, and I close them up. Now I got space on the second floor and the first. So the general rule of thumb with stairs, even though the space under the stairs may be, may not be usable, may not be, but they're, that's minimal square foot. It's kind of like utility closets. They're gonna let it because it's like, just easier. It's just close enough. So they're gonna count it twice.
So what about a split foyer that has stairs that go down, then a main level, then it goes up to the main level?
So you got stair on the level on the bottom. If the bottom level is finished heat and square footage, you got the stairs on the main level, and then you got the stairs on the main level and the second level. So you would have everything on the main, some of it on the second, some of it on the lower level. Yeah.
Okay, another question. So just if you have, like she said, the split level with 2 sets of stairs, you're going to count them twice. No.
Everything's going to be on one level, right? Because I got the stairs here and I got the bottom of the stairs here. But the second story is going to have a staircase. The bottom level is going to have a staircase. So wherever the staircase is, that's what counts twice. But if I don't have stairs, I can't count it. So I'm looking at counting just the stair, just kind of separate the stairs, separate the staircases. I got 2 different staircases. So I got 2 different things going on.
Okay.
I know stairs are tricky. So let's just look very briefly. So let's say you got a home. And this home has a garage. So here's our garage. This home also has a porch. Part of the porch is outside, but part of the porch kind of juts into the living room a little bit. So again, we're gonna start outside. Usually when we start outside, we use like cloth measuring tapes, and you can get them, they're on this big roll and they unroll and they start with like 100 feet. So you can start with a big cloth measuring tape. And when you start, you're gonna start outside and you're gonna measure. You're just gonna go from corner to corner, corner to corner to corner to corner, right? You're just going from corner to corner. You'll add it all up, and this will give you everything that's under the roof. Laser measurers work really good inside. They don't work as well outside because I need to point it somewhere. So we can, and laser, they're really cool for inside to measuring the rooms, but outside, we generally need something, again, those cloth measuring tapes, whatever. And we're going to go from corner to corner, corner. I'm measuring everything under the roof. And then once I get that, then I go inside and I deduct what doesn't count. Now I'm going to say this home has a great garage. This home has a wonderful porch, but I can't count them in my total heated criteria, my total heated square footage. So the laser measure, because remember, we're just talking about total heated living area. The commission also doesn't require us to report the square footage of a room, the dimensions of a room, I should say. MLSs, most MLSs don't require that, but buyers like to see it. Some sellers want to know that we, taken that extra step and got them the room dimensions as well. So when you're getting the room dimensions, now you can take your laser measure. I call it my little toy, but it's a cool tool. And you can take your laser measure and you hold it up to the wall, you point your laser to the other wall, and you go click, and it tells you how many feet and inches. And then you go to this wall and you hold it up and you point it to that wall and you go click, and it tells you how many feet and inches. And we may remember from previous unit, length times width gives me square foot. So when I'm advertising the dimensions of a kitchen or the living room or the bedrooms, buyers like to see this. Buyers like to know that their furniture can fit in this home. So they like to see the dimensions of the room, but guys, it's not required. You don't have to. Can you? That could be up to you and your firm. That could be up to you and your seller. You don't have to go far or find listings for sale where they don't have room dimensions. So we can do the interior, we can spell that out. And that does absolutely help. I think it helps sell the property a little bit. And another thing about that laser measure, it's good to keep in your trunk, because remember you're with that buyer and they walk in the room and they say, is this really 16 by 16? It does not look 16 by 16. So I run out to my trunk real quick, get my laser measure and measure that room. It takes me longer to go get it than it does to use it to measure the room. So keep that thing handy, you guys. Amazon, Lowe's, wherever you like to buy your favorite tools, I got mine from Santa the year that I started in sales. So I can't tell you where it came from or how much it was, but it's a good one having laying around for sure. Graph paper is suggested if you're going to measure yourself, so you can graph it out. 10 squares per foot kind of thing is how the commission rule measures. Any kind of tool, rulers, anything like that, if you're going to measure yourself. Now, if you're measuring yourself, remember, as a newbie, your broker in charge may go with you to measure. They may send you with an agent, maybe a top producing agent that they trust, knows what they're doing. So they may send you to shadow a couple homes being measured. The first one you go measure on your own. You may have somebody with you just guiding you, making sure that you're doing it right. The first home I ever measured, I took a general contractor with me, and I thought he was going to be so helpful. He let me figure it out the hard way as I went. He is the most patient man I've ever met. I didn't think we were ever going to get done. The first house I measured took 4 ever. The second home got a little bit better. The third one got a little bit better. So what I say to you is you guys give it a shot. Give it a shot to determine if you want to continue doing this. If you don't, there's so many companies out there. There are so many people out there that'll do it for a fee, of course. I just need you to vet them. I just need you to make sure that they have that residential square footage guidelines and that they understand that it is the only way that you can report that square footage. There was a disciplinary action last month in the bulletin. Y'all, they took down the listing agent, the co-listing, the BIC, and the BIC of the team. 4 of them got taken down over misrepresentation of square footage. They were off by over 25%. 4 of them got taken down because they said between the 4 of y'all, somebody should have gotten this. This is huge, you guys. So again, if you're going to do it, or if you're going to have somebody do it, just make sure 25% is big. Now they're going to give us a little room for error, 5%, 10%, that's not huge. But 25%, I mean, that's like almost a room, that's pretty big. Yeah, Dee.
What if there's a garage and there's a room on top of the garage? How would you measure that? Are you taking away from the
Well, as we
measurements from the
said, if the
outside?
finished room over the garage is heated and finished, the next question is it directly accessible? Do you have to go through the garage to get to the staircase? Or is it off the kitchen where you don't have to go through the garage? If it's not directly accessible, I'm going to advertise it. I'm going to say finished room over garage, extra space, da, da, da. But if it's not directly accessible, those 3 questions we need to ask ourselves. If it's not directly accessible, then I can't count it. Yeah, Angel.
So direct accessible meaning like it's not accessible through another room. Like for example, like if it's like I know my parents had they had built in their garage room and they had to access it through the bathroom. So they made a little door in the bathroom. That wouldn't be
Was the space heated and finished?
yeah.
Then it
And
was directly accessible,
Oh, okay.
right? I mean, without me seeing it, but if it's heated and it's finished, if you can go from room to room to room without getting cold, what if you have a bonus room and it's connected by a breezeway? You added a room on, but it's connected by a breezeway. Is the breezeway heated and finished? If so, you can count it. If not, you can't. That's what we mean by directly accessible.
Okay, thank you.
So again, to qualify, let's see, remind me what the ceiling heights are.
7 feet.
7
7
feet
feet.
or 5.
Slant.
Or if it's
7
an
feet.
attic, it's 5 feet, right? The lowest.
And then the slant or the sloped roof, the bottom part, so you got the sloped roof of the bonus room, the bottom part of the slope is 5. Let's see, this exception would be the sloped ceilings for 5. And then what do we mean by directly accessible? From heated finished living area to heated finished living area. It's like going from the bedroom to the hallway to the living room, right? I went from area to area to area that's heated and finished so I can count it. If I go out of this room and I get cold to get to the next room, then I can't count it. You may come across a finished basement that's called a walkout basement, which means there's no stairs. You have to walk outside and walk around. I can't count it because I have to go outside to get to it. But I'm going to advertise and promote that that walkout basement. I just can't count it. I'm going to stop sharing just for 1 second because I have an idea and this might help. So if you guys have any questions, pull those up and I'm going to the Winston-Salem Board of Realtors produced a video. And this is, just a second. This is, it does a really good job. And I don't want to watch the whole video because it does get into more than where we need to go. But I want to show some of this video because it does kind of show what we're talking about. And sometimes it's easier to see it than it is to hear about it. So let me come back and get you guys. And I'll go ahead before we leave, help me remember. I'll go ahead and put the link to this video in the chat. So if you want to watch the whole video, you can. But again, I just kind of want to show you the piece that's talking about what we need to know for our test. So I'm going to hit play. If y'all give me the thumbs up that you can hear it, I would appreciate that.
Home Measurement Fundamentals is brought to you by the Winston-Salem Regional Association of Realtors and Piedmont Federal Savings Bank. Any discussion of a home starts with two fundamental questions. The first, of course, is, where is it? That question is always closely followed by, how large is it? As you probably know, that's a really important question, and it's the subject of this video series. There are 5 videos overall, with this video tackling the details of what space or square footage should be included. The remaining 4 videos show you how to apply what you will learn in this video to homes of varied construction and architectural styles. There are a number of fundamentals that will impact your work in measuring any home regardless of its style. Let's get started. The valuation of a residential property is directly impacted by the size of the house. Potential homeowners make decisions based on the sizes of homes they are considering. An inaccurate home measurement can lead to a valuation that is wrong, and to incorrect decisions being made by potential homeowners who rely on those measurements. No one wants that, of course. Calculating the accurate size of a home requires a disciplined and technical process. The size or portion of a home that matters most is its living area. This is sometimes called heated living area or heated square footage. A clear understanding of what is and is not included within the living area of a home is critical. The living area of a home is the space that will be occupied by the homeowner. As you've probably guessed, the living area does not include all of the space that is under the roof of the home. First off, the living area must be heated with a permanently installed heating system that makes the space suitable for living year-round. Neither a portable heater nor a fireplace is considered permanent heating sources. In addition, the living area must be finished with walls painted and floors covered. The living area must also have a ceiling height of at least 7 feet, except under beams and ducts where the ceiling height must be at least 6 feet 4 inches. When a room has sloped ceilings, such as those often found in bonus rooms and finished attic spaces, the area of a room with a ceiling height of at least 5 feet can be included in the living area of the home, so long as at least half of the room's square footage has a ceiling height of at least 7 feet. The living area must also be directly accessible from other living areas via a doorway, heated hallway, or stairway. If a space within the home is heated, finished, and directly accessible from other living areas, it counts as a living area, and its square footage is included. Questions sometimes arise regarding whether to include a number of special areas and architectural spaces within the living space of the home. Let's run through a number of those now. Assuming that these spaces meet the criteria of heated, finished, and directly accessible from other living areas, then the following spaces can be included within the living area of the home. Attics. Again, if they meet the living area criteria, then they do count. But keep in mind the ceiling height requirements we mentioned earlier. Also, be sure to note that this space is in the attic in the listing notes for the home. Many attics will not meet the living area requirements, but some will. Basements. Remember that the space must be finished, and again, keep the ceiling height requirements in mind, as well as the need to be directly accessible from other living areas of the home. If the basement is included in living space, make note that the space is below grade or is a basement space. Bay window areas. If the space has a finished floor and ceiling height of at least 7 feet, it counts as living area. Bonus rooms, also called finished rooms over the garage, they count. Just keep the ceiling height requirements in mind. Chimney. The space for the chimney base counts as living area if it is located inside the living area. If the chimney base is outside of the living area, then it does not count. If the hearth is included inside the living area, then include the space for the hearth. Stairs. If the stairs connect living area spaces, include the area of the stairs with the area of the floor from which the stairs descend. If the opening for the stairway exceeds the length and width of the stairway, subtract the excess space from the upper floor and include it with the lower floor, regardless of the ceiling height under the stairs. Furnace and mechanical rooms. For simplicity, if these spaces are located within the living area of the home, they are included, even if the living area criteria are not met. Hallways, closets, dormers, offices, storage rooms, and laundry rooms, they're all included if they meet the living area criteria. Spaces within the home that do not meet the living area criteria should not be included within the square footage of the living area, but should be mentioned in the listing data for the home. These would include areas such as unfinished basements, unfinished attics, and unfinished bonus rooms. Decks, balconies, porches, garages, and carports should not be included in finished or unfinished area calculations for the home, but are noted for information purposes. At this point, you have a good idea of what should and should not be included in the living area.
Did that help to kind of see it a little bit? See those? So I'm going to put again, and it goes on to talk about the tools and the, the graph paper. You're not going to be tested on that stuff. So if you want to watch it now, great. Also, they talked about other videos in the series that get into specifics like different types. So again, if you want to watch episode, you guys know how YouTube works. You can, when you watch one, it pulls up episode 2, episode 3. So you can kind of look at your scroll bar over here to find those other episodes. With that all being said, everybody look at me. Don't spend all your study time watching these measurement videos because it's only 2 pages of your book. So we need to understand a few things, but I'm not trying to teach you guys how to measure a house yet. Head bobs? Okay, so I trust you. I'm going to put the link to this video that we just saw in the chat so you can grab it and click on it and watch it again, because I do know that helps. Somebody says I have an unfinished basement, but it's accessible. Would it count? It's unfinished, so it doesn't meet the 3 criteria. You said, yes, it's heated. No, it's not finished, so it doesn't count. I have to have heated, I have to have finished, and I have to have directly accessible. Did you guys get the link? Do you see the link? If you want it, no, you don't have to. But if you want it, if you want to see that video again, I do think, it just helps to see the pictures.
It really helped with the stairs though. So now I see what you mean when you say, like, you bring it up.
Yeah, you had to, like I said, like a little do, and now I got it on 2 levels. So, the picture that they showed in the video, the house they showed in the video, there was part of the first floor that didn't have a ceiling. It went from first floor the whole way to the second. So I can only count the part of the second floor. I can't count the air that I can't walk on, but I can count the stairs because they descend from the second story. Yeah, panel heaters, things like that get interesting. I showed a house once that had, y'all ready for this? Ceiling heaters. They were like radiator coils in the ceiling. And my buyers and I stood there. All of us were like, what in the world are we looking at? What's one thing we know about heat?
Rises.
It
Heat
rises.
rises. So what good is the heating units in the ceiling, right? Y'all, I have a
Mm.
general contractor on my team, and let me tell you something about the benefits of that, you know? So I took him a picture and I said, what are we looking at? And he was like, yep, that was a design fail. That was something that they tried many, many years ago and it didn't work because it wasn't heating the room, it was heating, the ceiling. So you're going to come across some weird stuff. This is why you have a bit. This is why you have those people in your tool belt. But again, you should be, when you're out, especially when you first start, it is really encouraged. At least go shadow, see what the process is about, and make sure you get that booklet. If you don't want to do it, that's great. Some agents say, I don't want to mess with this. And hey, I don't blame you. I don't blame you one bit. But you still need to make sure that the person that you hire knows what they're doing. There's so many companies out there that will, I'll measure your listing and take pictures. Before I sign anything with you, we need to have a conversation. We need to vet them first. Is everybody good with that? Because remember, who is ultimately responsible for the advertised square footage?
Listing agent.
The listing agent. So we're not relying on tax records. We're not relying on what the seller says. We are relying on our own information, and we need to be involved in this process. So I'm not getting into the math tonight because that's really mean. But the last piece that we have to do is to talk a little bit of math. And I think we can go ahead and introduce you to some formulas that we're going to use when we do the math. So this first one we've already seen. If we want to measure squares or rectangles, I might be talking about a lot. I also might be talking about a room. So whether or not I'm measuring the lot or the kitchen, length times width is going to give me square footage. You may see different verbiage. Instead of length, if you're talking about the lot, they may call it the front foot. Instead of width, they may call it the depth. And instead of square footage, they may call it area. I'm saying the same thing. The front foot is the length. The depth of the lot is the width. The square foot is the area. So just being familiar with the different verbiage. And remember, you guys, the front foot of a lot is the part of the lot that runs parallel with the road. The front foot is the part of the lot that runs parallel with the road. So we're going to use some of this math tomorrow night to measure a few things. The other shape, the good news is we only have to deal with 3 shapes. And the other shape that we may come across is a triangle. Now, for argument's sake, could everybody agree with me that a triangle is half of a square? Can we all agree? So to find a triangle, I'm going to take length times width and chop it in half. Divide it by 2. Good news, bad news. Not all rooms, not all houses are perfect squares or rectangles or triangles. You're going to come across different shapes, sizes. That's where we have our graph paper to kind of chop it up into squares and rectangles and triangles, because these are the only shapes that we know how to measure. I showed a house once. It was an octagon house. If I had an aerial view, it would look like a stop sign. And my buyer was one of my friends. And at one point during the show, and she looked at me and she said, Julie, how would you measure this? And I said, I would not. This is when I would call in the appraiser to do it, because this got out of my realm, my comfort level, very fast. So be prepared. You may come across a very unique home. They're not all squares and rectangles. So even if you are measuring on your own, if something gets too much for you, it's okay to reach out for help. It's okay. I'd rather reach out for help than do it wrong and wind up in the disciplinary action. For all of you to say, Julie told us not to do that. What's she doing in the disciplinary action? I'm not going to have it. So a couple formulas here. The other thing we're going to talk, we're going to start here very brief tomorrow night. The other thing we're going to briefly talk about is just some verbiage, just understanding some verbiage. So cost per square foot. In this case, that word per is a fancy word for divide. And what we're trying to find here is how much does each square foot of this property have? So let's say, for example, the home is valued at 300,000. I'm making numbers up, and it has 1,400 square feet. Cost per square foot. The cost of the home is 350 divided by 1,400 square feet tells me that every single square foot in this home costs $250. This is typically a good measurement, a good way for determining with builders when they're wanting to build. This may be their budget. They got to build a home that's 250 square feet, so that, or $250 per square feet. So it allows them to determine, you know, how much the cost of the building is going to be. I want a 1,400 square foot house, so we're going to start with a price at $350,000. Similar verbiage, you might hear cost per acre. Same thing. The cost of the lot. What is this? The value of the lot. This is going to be a big lot. So let's yeah, let's go big. So I got a $4.5 million lot per acre. Per means divide, and there's 25 acres. Again, just making numbers up. This is a pretty good size lot. So I take my 4.5 divided by 25, which tells me every single acre costs $180,000. So if I want to buy this $4.5 million property and subdivide it into 25 acres, that means I could sell each acre for $180,000. So it's not so much the math as it is understanding the verbiage. We're trying to find out how much each square foot costs. We're trying to find out how much each acre costs. And when we say cost per square foot, cost per acre, that's what we're saying. Questions?
If a space does not qualify to be in the total square feet, you can still say the square footage just, is that correct? I'm asking that question. I don't think I said that right. You can still say room above garage is 400 square feet.
Yeah.
But not in total square feet, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
And you would want to, Ariana, because that's good space, right? And we want to, that's a good selling point of the property. So we want to say, hey, there's additional square footage over the garage of 450 square feet. But I can't, when you're looking at how many heated living area square footage is in this house, it can't include that room because it doesn't have all three.
Okay.
So we have the ability, I can put in the square footage, I can put in the room dimensions. I also have, they're called public remarks, which is what you guys see on, you know, Zillow and Trulia and whatever your favorite websites are. So we can absolutely promote it and advertise it because it's a selling point. The other thing too, you guys, we got an appraisers unit coming up. It's like unit 7, I think. The appraisers, they're going to put value on the property when they're appraising the property, and they're going to also look at heated square footage. So another big reason for me to make sure that I'm properly promoting it is to make sure the seller and buyer are selling and buying for what the appraiser would believe that it's worth as well. And we're going to talk more about that, what that means when we get to unit 7. So a lot of people care, I guess, about what counts as total heated and what does not. Yeah, somebody bought a commercial space, 2,300 plus or 23,000 plus or minus square feet. Yeah. And measuring commercial buildings are different than residential. So the guidelines that we have is for residential properties. Usually most commercial agents don't measure their own. They have the general contractor come out because they have a different guideline. So what we're talking about here is residential. But yeah, it's not uncommon to see 23,000 plus or minus. You may see acres or square footage of a lot, 4.5 plus or minus acres kind of thing. So I'm going to call it here. Let's talk about what tomorrow is going to look like. Sorry, let me call it. Tomorrow, we're going to start with some math, so bring your calculators. We're going to look at this measuring math. Once we get through with Unit 5 tomorrow, we're going to be ready to take our first of 3 required exams. Remember, there are 3 that you have to attempt. So our first one, you'll be ready to do tomorrow. So we'll look at that, show you where you can find that. I don't need them done until you're ready to take your test. So if you want to wait till the end, if you want to do it tonight, I don't care. We just need to do it somewhere between now and test day. And then tomorrow, we don't have much more to say in Unit 5, a few math problems, and then we're done. And then tomorrow, we're going to get going in Unit 6. Unit 6 is our financing unit. Tomorrow, we get to put on our mortgage lender's hat. So we're going to stop being brokers for a while, and we're going to understand the basics of the lending process, because that's going to be a big help, specifically when we're working with our buyers. Angel, was that a hand? Or was that an old hand?
Yes, it was a hand. The question, I think you answered it earlier. But those tests that we're taking, the practice tests, we're able to retake them over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I just need you to do it once. Attempt it once. Questions? All right. Y'all have a good night. Sleep fast.
Thank
Do
you.
it again tomorrow. Good night.
Good night.
Right. Thank you.